Chapter 119. Ning Ke had vaguely remembered some of the wonderful things that happened yesterday morning, including the illusory but not dreamlike encounter when he was in a coma on the Long Street. The strength of a cultivator was undoubtedly revealed in the lakeside house. Even if he had brought 3 knives, he could not defeat the opponent. As for the encounter on the Long Street, it was even more dangerous. If it were not for Haotian's luck, he would not have survived, let alone have such a great lucky chance. He firmly believed that Haotian had his own purpose in letting him come to this world, so he believed that he would not die for no reason. This belief supported him through the most difficult period of his childhood and accompanied him through life and death situations. In his view, the big black umbrella beside Sang Sang's pillow was a gift from Haotian. The big black umbrella looked very ordinary, and nothing special could be seen except that it was very big. However, in the dangerous battle yesterday morning, if it had not blocked the invincible flying sword and Yan Suqing's sword fingers at the most critical moment, Ning Ke would have died long ago. The process of picking up the big black umbrella was very ordinary, just like how he picked up Sang Sang. Many years ago, Ning Ke walked on the official road with a little baby girl in his arms. It seemed that it was going to rain, and he happened to see an abandoned black umbrella by the roadside, so he picked it up. When the little boy's little hand held the thick handle of the big black umbrella, nothing strange happened in this world. The dark clouds did not pour down torrential rain, the distant Min Mountain did not shake, and there was not much black smoke rising into the sky. A certain golden-armored deity broke through the clouds and said a lot of nonsense. He did not know how to be thrifty at a young age, so he was ready to throw the black umbrella away after the rainy season because he thought it was too dirty and could not be washed in the stream. Besides, it was too heavy. It was really a bit troublesome to carry the black umbrella with the baby girl and compete with the barbarian refugees who migrated south because of the drought on the grassland for food distributed by the government. However, it was very strange that Sang Sang, who was still a thin baby girl, began to cry when she found that the umbrella was not in her arms, probably because she had slept with the big black umbrella for too long. Ning Ke could not coax her no matter how hard he tried. Even the sugar water he stole did not work. He had no choice but to pick up the big black umbrella again. Many encounters in the following years proved that Sang Sang's crying and Ning Ke's decision were extremely wise. In the process of hunting with the old hunter and later alone, the seemingly ordinary big black umbrella gradually revealed more and more strange things. The greasy surface of the big black umbrella was made of some unknown material, but it was not afraid of fire, knives, and swords at all. With this strange characteristic, the big black umbrella had saved Ning Ke and Sang Sang several times. It was because of the umbrella that the young master and handmaiden could survive in the dangerous world of the high mountains and steep ridges. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had been with the big black umbrella for many years and had long regarded it as a very important partner in their lives. That was why Sang Sang had said that day at the gate of Chang'an City, "As long as the umbrella lives, I live. If the umbrella dies, I die." In addition to being impervious to fire and knives, the big black umbrella had many other strange things. Ning Ke was very convinced of this, but he was not able to find it for the time being. He needed to explore it slowly. The battle in the morning yesterday was like the most dangerous battles in the past decade. At the last moment of life and death, he almost instinctively gave his life to the big black umbrella behind him. It turned out that the big black umbrella did not let him down. At the same time, he also discovered another secret of the big black umbrella. It could make the traceless flying sword lose all its power, and it could make a sword master unable to break through it even with his lifetime cultivation. This had gone beyond the original physical defense characteristics of the big black umbrella and entered a more wonderful state. Ning Ke even faintly felt that the big black umbrella was very likely to restrain the ability of cultivators. It could be said that the umbrella's cloth was made of some rare materials since it was impervious to swords and spears and impervious to water and fire. However, if his inference was correct, what reason could he use to explain all this? The big black umbrella lay quietly beside Sangsang's dark face. It could neither speak nor move, just like a lifeless object. However, at this time, in Ning Kei's eyes, the tightly bound oily umbrella began to gradually release a mysterious aura. The aura was a little cold, but it disappeared in an instant when Ning Kei took a closer look. In the face of mysterious things, human beings would instinctively feel fear. However, this was, after all, a cultivation world full of the qi of heaven and earth with many magical legends. Ning Kei himself was the person involved in the most mysterious event. In addition, he had been accompanied by the big black umbrella since childhood. He used it as a shelter, a pillow, and a shield to escape. It had long become an indispensable part of his and Sangsang's lives, so how could he have any fear? What on earth are you? Ning Kei, who had not yet recovered from his serious injury and encountered a surprise and happiness that made him dizzy, got up early and fell asleep while looking at the big black umbrella. He subconsciously held Sangsang in his arms through the thin sheet. With a light clap, the cattail leaf fan fell to the ground. A dim sun hung above the silent wilderness. The environment was dark as if night was coming. The surrounding temperature was very low, and the purest and most extreme darkness was spreading from afar. It looked like it was about to occupy the entire world. The silence of the wilderness did not mean that there were no people here. There were many people of all kinds. These people did not look up at the sky, but looked at Ning Quebec. Their eyes were full of expectations, disdain, doubt, and very complicated emotions. Ning Kei knew that he had begun to dream again. It was not the dream of the sea when he was meditating. It was a continuation of the terrible dream on the journey. Although he knew that he was in a dream, he still felt cold all over, as if the eyes of these people in the wilderness, no matter what kind of emotion they contained, hid some subtle hostility. The darkness gradually invaded the sky above the wilderness, and the pure night covered half of the sky. At this moment, a roar of thunder came from the wilderness, and instantly spread to the whole world. Many people in the wilderness were knocked down to the ground by the roar of thunder, moaning in pain. The expressions on the faces of those who could still stand suddenly disappeared. Like lifeless statues, they looked up at the sky again, to the place where the thunder came from. The holy light instantly lit up the whole night sky. High up in the sky, in the center of the holy radiance, there was a gigantic golden gate that slowly opened, and a gigantic golden dragon could be vaguely seen poking its head out. The thunder was the sound of the door opening. This chapter can only contain 2,000 words. I really can't stand it anymore. I've tried my best. Put your palms together. In addition, please vote for me to encourage me. Both the recommendation and the monthly vote are good. Please. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 120. It was still night when he woke up from the dream. Ning Kei wiped the sweat off his forehead and sat on the bed. He looked at Sangsang, who was sleeping soundly beside him, and subconsciously reached out his fingers to smooth her frowning eyebrows. Then he fell into deep thought. It was meaningless to think about this strange and frightening dream. After a moment of silence, he threw the content of the dream to the back of his mind and did not even want to recall it. He got out of bed and poured himself a cup of cold tea. Listening to the loud discussion of the neighbors in the narrow alley behind the house, he realized that it was still early and everyone was still enjoying the cool air. What the eyes see and what the heart feels is the projection of the primordial energy of all things in the world on his soul. And the purer and purer the will that this cultivator obtains through meditation, the more concentrated and powerful the primordial energy he feels will be. He was too excited during the day and completely calmed down now. Thinking of what Liu Qingchen said on the journey, he realized that he had forgotten the most important question: how much qi of heaven and earth did he feel when he entered the initial awareness state? Was it a puddle of rain, a stream, a shallow pond, or a big river, or a sea? It was not the first time that he entered the initial awareness state. He did not know whether the world of chi of heaven and earth he felt was a real projection. After thinking for a moment, Ning Ke slowly closed his eyes and calmly put his hands on his knees. He re-entered the state of meditation and transmitted his thoughts to the ocean of chi and mountain of snow, and then spread them out of his body. After a while, the cautious meditation in the spiritual world transitioned to the perception in the real world. He opened his eyes and stretched out his right hand in the air, as if he wanted to catch the faint candlelight. At this time, he once again confirmed that he could clearly feel the aura in the eaves, walls, and air, and shockingly confirmed that what he felt was, "I think it's a sea, a peaceful sea." Liu Qingchen once said, "The most powerful cultivator in the world today, Liu Bai, the sage of sword from South Jin Kingdom, who was regarded as the most likely to break through the 5 states, sensed a surging yellow river at the beginning of his awakening." At that time, Ning Ke once said, "If one could sense a sea, would he be a cultivation genius more powerful than the sage of sword from South Jin Kingdom?" For more than 10 years, he ate, gambled, read, wrote, slept, rode, killed, and set fires. He kept meditating. The amount of psyche power in the young man's spiritual world was huge and extremely pure. As 10 of the 17 acupoints in the ocean of chi and mountain of snow were opened, the accumulated psyche power finally found a channel and was played into a sonorous and powerful music. The breath of heaven and earth sensed this tune. Although there weren't many holes on the flute, and the song seemed a little sluggish, it could feel the power contained in every note of the song. However, this power was so concentrated that the breath of heaven and earth faintly rejected it. If the breath of heaven and earth that Ning Ke sensed was like a sea, then the psyche power that he used to sense the breath of heaven and earth was like a well-tempered iron needle. His psyche power was extremely small, but extremely hard and sharp. The sharp iron needle gently fell into the sea. It didn't make any waves, nor did it make any sound. It easily and silently passed through the boundless deep water, and then slowly and silently fell into the dark abyss. Ning Ke didn't know these specific problems, nor did he want to think about any negative things. He was like a boy who had cried for his mother's thigh for half a year and finally got a new toy that he wanted for a long time. He spent the whole night meditating and then releasing his psyche, feeling the new and wonderful aura. His palm kept shaking in the air, trying to catch the dim candlelight in the shack and influence the pea-sized candle on the table. Although he failed, it didn't affect his interest at all. He was still in high spirits. Strangely, when he left the old brush pen shop the next morning, he didn't look haggard because he didn't sleep all night. Instead, he looked very energetic and healthy. Maybe it was because he was in high spirits when he encountered a happy event. Ning Ke came to the academy by horse carriage. Looking at the green meadow, the lush green trees, the flowing clouds on the mountain, the beautiful morning light in the east, and the black and white buildings and eaves covered by the clouds, Ning Ke always felt that the world in his eyes was coated with a beautiful halo. The originally very beautiful mountain of the academy looked even more charming, and he was so happy that he wanted to laugh out loud. Because he was in a good mood, he changed his usual gentle and alienated temperament and took the initiative to greet his classmate who just got off the horse carriage and was holding a pancake in one hand and a book in the other. However, the atmosphere in the academy today was a little strange. To be more precise, the atmosphere surrounding Ning Ke was a little strange. His classmates did not seem to be in the mood to exchange pleasantries with him. In the distance, some students even gathered in a group and pointed at him with disdain. Ning Ke walked into classroom 3 in bewilderment. Then, he was surprised to find that the classmates he was more familiar with in the study room were behaving strangely as well. They were all looking at him strangely. He suppressed the doubts in his heart and nodded to Situelan who was sitting in the front row, and then walked to his seat. Situelan lowered her head to look at the review paper for the mathematics class yesterday and didn't seem to see his movement. However, when he walked past her, she looked back and sighed at Ning Ke's back. "I've taken 2 days off, but why do I feel that everyone is looking at me differently?" Ning Ke sat down and looked at Chu Yuxian beside him. He asked with a smile, "Does everyone know that I jumped off the cliff and have an adventure, so they are jealous and hate me?" This was naturally a naughty joke, but the cheerful Chu Yuxian didn't have a smile on his face. He stared at Ning Ke's face and said seriously, "You really don't know what happened?" "I don't know." Ning Ke spread out his hands and said innocently, "The Empire is attacking the Northern Yen again. Today is the etiquette class, and the instructor is a Yen with a bad temper. That is indeed worth worrying about. Isn't it a little inappropriate to make a joke at this time?" Chu Yuxian looked at him and sighed. He said, "The whole academy, from instructors to students, is staring at the semester exam the day before yesterday. They want to see who will win the bet between you and Xie Qingyun. Who can think that the final result is that he got A+ in 5 subjects, while you didn't take the exam? This is why you think everyone is so strange." Ning Ke was slightly stunned. After being reminded, he remembered what happened that morning after Xie Qingyun and other grade A dormitory students broke into grade C dormitory, and remembered that the semester exam in the bet had ended the day before yesterday. What was he doing at that time? At that time, he was leaning against the wall on the second floor of the old library, with an invisible spear in his chest and unconscious. He was accompanied by a bowl of water and 2 cold steamed buns, waiting for death. The semester exam was the day before yesterday. I really forgot. But I remember that I asked a female professor to ask for leave for me. Ning Ke explained with a smile. In his opinion, it was a very childish and funny thing to use the results of the semester exam as a yardstick for the gambling fight with Xie Qingyun. At that time, he only agreed to it because of the anger of Situelan and grade C dormitory students. Now that he missed the semester exam and the bet because of other things, it was indeed a pity to miss the opportunity to attack the pretentious arrogance of Xie Qingyun. But in any case, he would not lament, beat his chest and stamp his feet, cry on the table, and pretend to be a senior in grade 3 who forgot to get the admission ticket. In the quiet and serious morning of the semester exam in the academy, he killed a strong cultivator in the lakeside house and spent a very mysterious time on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. He went back and forth between life and death several times. He encountered the biggest crisis and the biggest luck in his 16 years of life. Compared with these things, these personal disputes were nothing. The problem is that you asked for leave. Chu Yuxian looked at him expressionlessly and said, "As long as you take part in the semester exam, even if the final result is bad and you are far from being Xie Qingyun's opponent, no one will have any opinions on you. There is no reason to win an exam. You were asked to fight that day just to show your courage. But no one thought that you would be so afraid that you even dare not to take the exam. This is too troublesome." Ning Ke listened to these words and could not help but be slightly startled. After a moment, he said with a smile, "What do you mean? Do I have to go straight to the examination room with my sick body, with a pale face and struggling to move the pen to take the exam? Do I have courage when I answer every question and only answer half of the questions? The snow-white paper is all dyed red, and then I die because of blood loss." His words were interesting, but there was also an extremely sharp and angry tone to them. "Are you really sick?" Chu Yuxian felt the anger hidden in his tone and said after being startled, "But looking at your ruddy face now, who will believe you?" Then he sighed and said, "Yesterday the results of the semester exam were announced. Linchuan Wangying got an A+ in 1 subject, and the other 5 A+ were all obtained by Xie Qingyun. I heard that he was stimulated by you these months and studied very hard. Now there is a rumor in the academy that you know you are not Xie Qingyun's opponent, but you are not willing to lose to him, so you came up with the idea of asking for sick leave to stop the fight." Ning Ke frowned and said, "It is shameful to retreat without a fight, not to mention to avoid a fight. Although I feel that this semester exam gamble is extremely boring, I won't be afraid since I've agreed to it. If it's really as you said, that I'm not sick, but I'm pretending to be sick to avoid the semester exam, isn't that what a coward would do?" Chu Yuxian now really believed that he was really sick the day before yesterday. He looked at him sympathetically and patted his shoulder to comfort him. I believe you, but the problem is that others, especially those in grade A dormitory, will not believe you. In the eyes of them and even most people in the academy, now you are a coward. Ning Ke was speechless and could not help shaking his head with a wry smile. There was some anger and unwillingness in his heart, but when he thought of those wonderful feelings last night, he decided not to think about these things anymore. Now he was also a genius student who could cultivate, why should he stoop down to the level of these little kids? Stare was very simple when it was used as a noun, but it was an action that required both sides to interact when it was used as a verb. He did not want to stare at those classmates who thought he was a coward who avoided the fight, but he could not stop some guys who automatically won because of his withdrawal from the competition to run in front of him and insist on stare at him with verbs. And this was the origin of most conflicts in all youth idol dramas. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 121. The bell rang for the third time. Ning Ke tidied up the stationery and prepared to go to the old library to read as usual. Today he was anxious to leave a message for Chen Pippi, so he walked out of the study room in a hurry. As soon as the bell rang, we came here. I thought this speed was extremely fast, but I didn't expect that we almost passed by you. I don't understand why you are so anxious. Are you anxious to go to the old library to pretend to be diligent, or are you anxious to leave the academy and pretend that you don't know about the semester exam and the gambling game that day? A group of people came in through the door, headed by Xie Qingyun and Zhong Dajuan from the South Jin Kingdom. After entering the door, Xie Qingyun greeted the students of classroom 3 with hands folded in front. He could not completely suppress the proud smile on his young face, but he still showed his gentle demeanor. Zhong Dajuan, who was beside him, stood in front of Ning Ke and tapped his palm with the folding fan in his hand. His expression seemed to be a smile, and his tone was extremely sarcastic. At least say a few words before you leave. Situilan stood up and wanted to say something. But thinking that Ning Ke did not take part in the semester exam, the A dormitory students naturally won the gambling game, she suddenly did not know what to say and had to sullenly sit down again. Jean Wuxia knew how competitive she was, and could not help but shake her head. Then she stood up and walked to Xie Qingyun, gently and softly congratulating him, with a gentle smile on her face like a gentle breeze. Want me to say a few words? Ning Ke looked at the A dormitory students at the door and felt the complicated emotions cast by his classmates behind him. After a little thought, he looked at Zhong Dajuan and said with a smile, "Then I will say a few words briefly." Then he added, "But what does this matter have to do with you? Please excuse me." Zhong Dajuan's face darkened, but he did not say anything more. He waved his fan and retreated to the side. Ning Ke and Xie Qingyun greeted each other with hands folded in front. As for what kind of complaints and disdain in their hearts, it was something that outsiders did not know. The study room suddenly became quiet, waiting to hear what he would say. After a short pause, Ning Ke looked at Xie Qingyun's pale cheeks and said with a smile, "There is no excuse. Since I did not take part in the semester exam, I naturally lost the gambling game. I remember the bet is to have a meal, so let's have a meal. You can choose the place and how many people you want to invite." Xie Qingyun was slightly stunned and did not expect that Ning Ke would admit defeat so openly. He could not say those words that he discussed with Zhong Dajuan in the Zhong mansion yesterday. Seeing that Xie Qingyun didn't know how to deal with it, Zhong Dajuan couldn't help but be annoyed that his friend was too gentle, so he sneered and interjected, "In order to avoid losing face in the semester exam, you even came up with such a despicable trick as pretending to be sick to avoid the exam. In the future, if we talk about it, you can shamelessly say that it's not that you're not a match for third young Master Xie, but that you're not in good health. When people like you invite us to dinner, we really worry that there's something strange at the table, so we definitely don't dare to go. Ning Ke slightly raised his eyebrows and looked at the Tang talent from Yang Valley. He said very seriously, I remember that the letter of challenge was taken from Xie Qingyun. So whether the semester exam is good or bad, or whether I win or lose the gambling game, it is between me and him. What does it have to do with you? If you want to have a meal, it depends on whether I can save a chair for you or not. Zhong Dajuan was not annoyed. He gently waved his fan and glanced at Xie Qingyun. Xie Qingyun did not want to be too aggressive in front of Jin Wuxia, but he could not help but feel disgusted when he saw that Ning Ke was still so eloquent and did not look ashamed. He frowned and said, there is no need to have a meal. I just hope you can realize that your behavior really disgraces the academy's reputation. I have to pay tuition fees to study in the academy. I pay money and learn things at the same time. So I don't think I need to carry something like 1,000 years of fame. Those things have nothing to do with me. Ning Ke raised his eyebrows more steeply and said, as for you saying that I pretended to be sick to avoid the exam, you'd better not talk about this boring inference in the future. Since we are not familiar with each other, I absolutely don't mind suing you for slander. The atmosphere in the study room gradually became tense because Ning Ke was too calm and did not have any intention of giving in. Similar to Xie Qingyun's feeling, most students looked at Ning Ke with more contempt. Chu Yuxian coughed twice and came forward to smooth things over. He said with a smile, knowing that you are not the opponent, but avoiding the battle to protect yourself is also a common means in the business world. You don't have to be so serious. Ning Ke glared at him and said, do you want to help me or pour a few buckets of dirty water on me? If you can't win the exam, just admit defeat. Why do you use such a rogue trick? Someone in the study room suddenly said. Ning Ke did not turn his head to look at the source of the voice, but he knew that it was a student in the same room. After a moment of silence, he looked at the classmates around him who showed contempt, puzzlement and many complicated expressions, smiled uninterestedly, and then began to speak. I don't care whether you believe what I say or not, and I don't care whether you will secretly call me a coward or not. Because our levels are not the same. You can say that I am unreasonable, because I don't have the spirit to reason with you. As Her Highness said outside the old library that day, you are just some flowers in the greenhouse. Although you look beautiful, you have to hide from the outdoor storm. You have nothing to do all day long, so you have to show off everywhere and rack your brains to make some slanting wind and drizzle to show your strength and ability. But it's none of my business. If I'm interested in playing with you, then I'll play. If not, then I won't play. Don't think about questioning me with things like integrity and bearing. You care about things like integrity, bearing and morality, but I don't. When you were still lying in your mother's arms and being threatened by her with Grassland Horse Gang because you refused to drink milk, I was already playing with the horse gang's head on the grassland. I just said, I don't care whether you will laugh at me behind my back, I am a coward and a rascal, but you must remember, from now on, don't let me hear you laugh at me, because I don't like it. Don't ignore my threat, if you don't want to have your head turned into a ball like those horse gangs. After saying this, he did not look at the people in the study room again. He waved his hand to signal the grade A dormitory students in front of him to make way. He raised his head and puffed out his chest, walked out of the door, and walked along the rain-sheltered corridor to the back of the academy. He was originally in a good mood, but because of these dirty things that popped out of nowhere, his mood was really bad. Especially when he found that even those classmates who were familiar with him did not mean to defend him, but believed what Zhong Dajuan said, he was even more annoyed. Since he was annoyed, he did not bother to pretend to be a gentle, cute, and harmless primary school student, and directly expressed his feelings. Chu Yuxian looked at the back of the figure in the rain-sheltered corridor and hurriedly caught up with him. He shook his head and sighed, "This is great, you have offended all of my classmates, I have to keep a distance from you in the future." "Then why do you still want to catch up at this time?" Ning Ke said with a smile. "You said that they are little brats, but the girls in dozens of brothels in Chang'an can prove that I am not a little brat, so I don't think that your words hurt me. Chu Yuxian said with a smile, moreover, if I have a good relationship with you, I might be able to get close to the top girl in the House of Red Sleeves in the future. You don't have to look at me like this, don't worry, I will only look at Dewdrop from afar, I just want you to introduce Lu Shui to me. Ning Ke looked at him sideways and said with a smile, aren't you afraid of offending a large group of classmates? Everyone in the academy knows that we have a good relationship, if you fall out with them and I leave you behind, I will be judged as heartless by those pedants. You know that I don't like to study, and I can't get used to seeing those pedants. Chu Yuxian laughed at himself, stopped and said, so I have to comfort you in front of them, but as you said, I can't go against the academy, so I have to go back now. For a border town soldier who had lived a bloody life since he was young and could be described as killing people like flax on the grassland, he was not used to the quiet and peaceful life in the academy, not to mention those classmates who grew up in a peaceful world. The evaluation above was Ning Ke's true feelings, but to the students in the study room, this evaluation was undoubtedly the most vicious attack, and they could not help but be stunned on the spot. To the third young Master Xie of South Jin Kingdom, the bet with Ning Ke on the semester exam was a very important matter. That was because he had been defeated by this seemingly ordinary lad during the academy entrance examination and had suffered a crushing defeat at the old library. He had even been coldly reprimanded by the fourth princess of Tang. He had hoped that this bet could help him regain his confidence. It was a rare good result to get an A+ in 5 courses. Xie Qingyun's joy inevitably gave birth to some pride. Today, he brought his companions to classroom 3, not necessarily to humiliate Ning Ke, but also to show off his brocade clothes. For Zhong Dajuan, after entering the academy, all the limelight had been taken by Xie Qingyun and Ning Ke, as well as Lin Chuan Wangying, who was only 14 years old. As a talent carefully cultivated by the Yangguan family, how could he be reconciled? Xie Qingyun and Wang Ying had a great reputation before entering the academy, and one of them was his close friend, while the other was too young. But who was Ning Ke? How could he be above him? Therefore, for this semester exam bet, he was even more attentive than Xie Qingyun. Today, coming to classroom 3 was undoubtedly to humiliate Ning Ke, and at the same time, to expose his scoundrel and insidious face to the academy students. However, whether it was Xie Qingyun or Zhong Dajuan, or those grade A dormitory students who followed them to classroom 3 to watch the fun and cheer, they did not expect that after such a despicable and cowardly act, Ning Ke would not feel ashamed at all, and instead, he reprimanded them for their humiliation. They had originally come to humiliate him, but in the end, Ning Ke used a trick called unreasonable to block all of them, and instead, they were humiliated by him. Therefore, those students who had some doubts that Ning Ke might really be sick on the day of the semester exam were not willing to think in that direction again. Not only them, but all the young students, including the students of classroom 3, were enraged by Ning Ke's seemingly forceful reprimand, but in fact, unreasonable. Even the most ordinary student from a commoner's family was loved in the school of their hometown. How could they endure the ridicule of a group? Forget it. Don't lower yourself to that guy's level. A student suppressed his unwillingness and reminded the crowd, after all, he is an old friend of the princess. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 122. It's not appropriate to use the word old friend. Zhong Dajuan stared at the back of the figure in the rainproof corridor and said angrily, who knows how Her Highness met him and was deceived by him. In front of the study room, the burly Chu Zhongtian scratched his head and said, I mentioned to my elders that Her Highness knew Ning Ke after I returned home. My fifth uncle later wrote back that he had asked Hua Shanyue, the senior military officer of Gushan Commandery. He said that Ning Ke was a soldier of the city of Wei. His Highness had accompanied His Highness on the way back to the capital. His Highness remembered this, so he occasionally took care of him in Chang'an. Chu Zhongtian was the best among the 37 grandsons of great General Chu Xiongtu of the Tang Empire's 16 guards. He was doted on in the residence, and the elders would not avoid him when discussing the court affairs. Therefore, his words were always credible. It seems that it was just a coincidence that day in front of the old library. As for helping Her Highness on her way back to the capital, Zhong Dajuan sneered lightly and said, "What can he do as a little soldier? By the way, helping to set up tents, leading horses and collecting dung can also be counted as helping. Her Highness is virtuous and kind, so it's not strange that she occasionally takes care of him. But I really didn't expect that this villain dared to use Her Highness's prestige to raise his status. He is really despicable." Hearing this, Situelan, who had been sitting silently beside the table, suddenly stood up and looked at Zhong Dajuan. She said, "When did Ning Ke use Her Highness's prestige to raise his status? I know better than you what Ning Ke did on her way back from the city of Wei. If it was just to collect dung, do you think Her Highness would come to see him in person that day?" She raised her eyebrows and said in a low voice, "You said Ning Ke is a villain and despicable. Then I don't know what you mean by talking about others behind their backs. If you really think he is so unbearable, you can point it out to him. But as he said before he left, you dare not because you are still afraid of him." Zhong Dejun's face darkened. He did not expect that this noble lady of Chang'an would still speak for Ning Ke when he had offended most of his classmates. He suppressed his anger and explained, "I'm not afraid of him. But we are all refined people. Do we have to roll up our sleeves and fight with that young barbarian?" Situelan did not want to talk with this so-called gifted scholar. She looked back at her companion who was whispering to Xie Qingyun, frowned slightly, and asked angrily, "Wuxia, are you coming back?" Jean Wuxia secretly glanced at Xie Qingyun's face, and then looked at Situelan with a smile, saying, "You go back first, I'll go to the old library to read for a while." Situelan knew that the so-called reading in the old library was just an excuse, so she didn't bother to pay attention to it. She packed up her things and walked to Xie Qingyun. Looking at the famous talent of the South Jin Kingdom, she said, "Wuxia is the favorite granddaughter of the libationer of the Tang Empire. Although you are famous in the South Jin Kingdom, please go to the second floor first." Xie Qingyun instantly understood what she meant. He smiled slightly and said confidently, "I'll try my best." Zhong Dejun was dissatisfied with Situelan's previous words for Ning Quebec. He said sarcastically, "If Mr. Xie can't enter the second floor, I think no student of the academy can enter this year. Or do you think Ning Ke can enter?" Situelan frowned and glanced at him, and then turned away angrily. In front of all the classmates in the dormitory, she couldn't promise that Ning Ke could enter the second floor. Not to mention that she did not believe it, she believed that Ning Ke dared not have such an extravagant hope. In the kitchen, Ning Ke ate 3 pieces of fried steamed buns with a bowl of golden millet porridge. He passed through the wetland at the fastest speed, walked into the quiet old library, and entered the second floor. This second floor was different from the previous second floor. But for him, this floor full of books and the faint fragrance of old ink was also of great significance. It was unknown whether it was the faint scent of books that calmed one's mind easily, or the tightly closed west window blocked the blazing sunlight, making the building cool and pleasant. Walking into the second floor, Ning Ke's previous grievances in the study room, like the summer sweat on his body, were instantly swept away. Walking to the east window, Ning Ke looked at the slender, gentle and tranquil female professor, and bowed respectfully as usual. After straightening up, he looked at the beautiful side face of the female professor, whose age could not be guessed. Thinking of the day before yesterday, when he was seriously injured and about to die, he had a strong confusion in his heart. He wanted to open his mouth to ask her a few questions, but in the end, he did not dare to act rashly. The female professor seemed to have forgotten what she saw the day before yesterday, and that the lad beside her had been leaning against the wall in the building, waiting for death. She gently nodded her chin as usual, without looking at Ning-Kei or saying anything. She quietly read the hairpin-style small regular script on the paper. If one did not look carefully, it would be difficult to notice the slight movement of her chin. Ning-Kei laughed at himself, scratched his head, and stopped thinking about those things. He walked back to the bookshelf, squatted down, took out the book Wu Zhanyang's Theory on Haran Sword, sat on the floor by the west window, and read it attentively with the dim light coming through the window paper. In the past, the acupoints in the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow were blocked, so he could not remember the cultivation scripts in the building. In the beginning, he even fainted when he saw the numbers. Later, when he learned to use the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong to break the characters, he could slightly understand the profound meaning of the handwriting in the book. However, those strokes still made him extremely distressed. For example, the strokes in the handwriting of the Haran sword book were like sharp sword radiance, piercing directly into his liver and intestines, making him extremely painful. Now, although he still could not clearly know how many acupoints in his ocean of Qi and mountain of snow had been opened, he could feel the breath of heaven and earth in the world, which was like a calm ocean, which was enough to prove that the 4 words, blocked without pain, had been mercifully taken away from him by Haotian. Therefore, he very much wanted to know what would be different when he read these books now. It was indeed different. The meaning hidden in the ink on the book entered his mind through his eyes and then gradually spread into his body. When it turned into sword rays that began to circulate around his body, he no longer felt the unbearable pain in his chest. Instead, it turned into a somewhat gloomy feeling. Blocked, very blocked, very blocked. This feeling was very bad, and it easily reminded him of Ma Yinglong's medicine. Therefore, after reading attentively for more than an hour, he shook his head and put down the book. He walked to the west window and began to leave a message for Chen Pipi. First, I've opened it. You can congratulate me. Second, why do these books still seem to be useless? Third, do you have any simple and feasible methods to teach me? Finally, thank you. With a very slight regret, Ning-Kei went downstairs in the twilight and took a horse carriage back to Lin 47th Street in Chang'an City. Then, he began to look forward to tomorrow's academy life, because he wanted to know what Chen Pipi's message would be. He did not know that his regret was actually an emotion that deserved a beating. If the West Hill Haotian Divine Palace or some other Vedanta of the Buddhism sect knew that a young man who had just entered the initial awareness state hoped to officially start cultivating within a day, they would definitely expel this young man for being greedy or greedy. If the instructors of the academy knew that one of their students had really become a peerless cultivation genius after opening 10 of the 17 acupoints in the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow and couldn't wait to learn the academy's unique skill, Haran sword, they would definitely praise him for being so narcissistic, and then make him stretch out his hand and slap his palm 100 times. The vermilion bird portrait carved by the sage of the previous generation on Chang'an Avenue, the mysterious big black umbrella behind him, and the heavenly power pill from a certain place in the West Hill were all the most precious and magical things in the world. But if it was only one of them, it was still not enough to make such a change in his body. There had always been a saying in the cultivation world that cultivation was just a chosen human being who was lucky to pick up the gift given by Haotian. If an ordinary person who was born unable to cultivate could cultivate, that was to go against the heaven and change his fate. The ability to go against the heaven and change his fate could only be a miracle. According to the classics or oral tradition, only the West Hill Divine Palace and the Haotian Divine Palace had this ability, and it required those great divine priests with a high state to pay a great price. Therefore, the ordinary cultivator beside Min Mountain, the talisman master in charge of the assessment of the military ministry, the old man Liu Qingchen on the journey, and Chen Pipi who left the letter could simply conclude that Ning-Kei could not cultivate without any hesitation. However, when the 3 most magical things in the world, the vermilion bird, the black umbrella, and the heavenly power pill, had sex with Ning-Kei at the same time, the world's slowly rotating fate slightly trembled. This sentence can be ignored. In that dark morning, the cultivator Yen Suqing first broke the bone and flesh defense on his chest with his lifetime cultivation, and then the top wing of the vermilion bird turned into an invisible spear and pierced through his ocean of qi and mountain of snow through this wound. Then the vermilion bird burned everything it touched with invisible fire. At this time, Ning Ke should have died. The big black umbrella played a key role at this time, protecting his last vitality like the shade of a willow that covered the sun, and reshaping the mountain of snow in his body with the inexhaustible power of the night sky. But this was not enough, because the reshaped micro-world in his body was so fragile and unstable that it could collapse at any time. At this time, Chen Pipi offered a heavenly power pill like a virgin offering her chastity. Heaven rewarded the diligent. Maybe it was because he had been too hard and tired in the past 10 years, so Haotian began to make it up to him. Ning Ke did not know that he had encountered the most magical luck in the world. Even if he knew, he could not understand the truth. He was still dissatisfied and regretful that his fate was changed against the heaven, and this kind of dissatisfaction and regret really made people angry and speechless. Chen Pipi was speechless and angry. Seeing the word, congratulations, Chen Pipi guessed that the guy had been forced to change his fate against the heaven and really embarked on the road of cultivation. He could not help but open his mouth wide and could not say a word for a long time. He strongly suspected that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He did not know about the magical battle between the vermilion bird and the big black umbrella on the long street with Ning Ke's body as the battlefield. But as a peerless cultivation genius cultivated by both the West Hill and the Academy, he could guess some reasons and consequences. But no matter how he guessed, he could not guess that Ning Ke could have such a miraculous lucky chance. The shock lasted for a long time, and he did not know what to say at all. Deep in his proud and gentle heart, a strong feeling of envy and jealousy grew. And when he saw the message on the paper, he could not suppress his anger. It was hot and dry in the summer. Although there was a cool breeze in the middle of the night, and the cicadas outside the west window gradually weakened, Chen Pipi was sweating all over, either because he was too fat or because he was angry. He untied his clothes and wrote back angrily, "First of all, I don't want to congratulate you, because this is too absurd and incomprehensible. Secondly, it's not that reading is useless, but you, a cultivation idiot, is useless. Thirdly, I admit that I am very jealous of you at this time, so I don't want to guide you. Finally, please thank Haotian and your ancestors of 18 generations. As for me, thank you my ass." Ning Ke had been brainwashed by one sentence when he was very, very young, in fact, when he was very, very young. The general meaning of that sentence was, a person's knowledge is like a circle. The more things you know, the bigger the circle is, and then you will find more and more things you don't know. He used to hate this sentence, and did not understand why his mother and teachers kept educating him with this pessimistic theory. But when he finally stepped into the world of cultivation, he found that this sentence was indeed very true, so true that it made him extremely confused and helpless, because he found that there were more and more things he did not understand. After seeing Chen Pipi's message, he very seriously read the cultivation books on the second floor according to the message, but he still could not find anything after looking at them. In this life, he was used to carrying 3 knives and killing people everywhere on the grassland, which was a relatively straightforward way of thinking, which was not a bad thing. After confirming that he could not move forward for the time being, Ning Ke decided not to think about it, but to do something more important. No one could imagine what was the first thing Ning Ke did after confirming that he could cultivate. He didn't hold a wine pot and write books all day long. He didn't go to the instructors of the academy and yell, "I can do it. I can do it. I can do it." He didn't go to the princess's mansion and tell Li Yu that he was worth investing in. Except for secretly happy in the old brush pen shop with Sang Sang, looking up from time to time like 2 fools, and then laughing inexplicably, he just showed off to Chen Pipi for a while, and then he went to the South City. Tonight, at the entrance of the famous star-picking casino in the South City, a nervous master and servant were whispering. The black-haired lad with a clear face and shallow cheeks looked up at the gold-painted signboard of the star-picking casino, and swallowed a mouthful of saliva, not knowing whether it was due to nervousness or greed, and asked in a slightly hoarse voice, "Sang, do you think we will be chased by the casino if we win too much later?" The slightly dark-skinned little handmaiden was also very nervous. She held a heavy box in her right hand and shrank her body behind the lad. Listening to the noise coming from the dim light, she said in a trembling voice, "Young master, I am more worried about whether your idea will work or not. Can you see the points on the dice by sensing the chi of heaven and earth? Are you sure? If I lose all the money later, don't be so anxious that you'll bet on me." "What nonsense are you talking about? Besides, even if I bet you, the casino may not accept it." Ning Kai nervously rubbed his hands and said, "As for the confidence, didn't I show it to you many times last night? I never fight a battle that I am not sure of. I will definitely win, but the key is how to run after winning. I'm sure we can win." Sang didn't seem to worry about running at all. After hearing that they could win, she gently bit her lips and made up her mind. She took out a small star made of folded paper from her old belt and said softly, "I took 200 taels of silver from under the bed and exchanged them for a banknote. There are still more than 100 taels of silver in the box. Young master, take it and win as much as you can." Well, this chapter has 4,000 taels of silver, including the 2,000 taels of silver from yesterday's chapter. But if there are still 2,000 taels of silver left, I'm not sure I will make up for it. I'm really writing like an idiot. Last night, I counted the days with my leader and found that there were still 5 days left. At that time, I wanted to open the window and jump down. But to be honest, I was able to finish it. Before writing this chapter, my body was weak, and my hands were shaking. I told Zhang Xiaohua that I couldn't do it anymore. Xiaohua asked, "What's wrong?" "Maybe it's because I'm too tired." Later, I smoothly finished writing 4,000 words. Then I realized that it wasn't because I was writing too hard. It was because I ate too little last night and was so hungry. I put my palms together and scolded the leader. "Finally, I want a recommendation vote." "Finally, thank you." "Don't thank my sister, I don't have a sister." "Good night, good morning, I'm going to walk the dog, and then I'll sleep. See you at night." This paragraph is more than 4,000 words, so I have no choice but to state it out of boredom to avoid misunderstanding. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 123. The star-picking casino in Southern City was the most profitable business of Master Meng, a tycoon in Jianghu. After the bloody battle in Spring Breeze Pavilion, Master Meng's power directly collapsed and the casino was smashed into a pile of ruins. It was not until 2 months later that the casino was renovated and opened again, but now no one knew who was the boss behind the casino. Although it was a casino that rose from the ruins, it was, after all, a time-honored one in Chang'an City. Besides, it was decorated at a high price. The wooden tables in the casino were bright, the lanterns were hanging high, and the furnishings were exquisite. There was no sign of decay. Ning Kai and Sang walked along the way, looking at the gauze curtain around them and hearing the deliberately suppressed exclamations in the hall in the distance. They could not help feeling a little strange. When they were in the frontier fortress, they often went to the casinos in City of Wei and Kaiping Market. However, compared with those small gambling shops full of sweaty, stinky, and swearing voices, this place was like another world. No matter how luxurious and elegant the decoration was, a casino was still a casino. After all, it was a bloody place where people put their lives on the chips to fight. People from all walks of life shuttled through it. Although Ning Kai and Sang, the young master and servant, were a little conspicuous, the stewards and servants of the casino were used to seeing gamblers of all kinds, so they just glanced at them casually and did not pay special attention to them. As for the gamblers in the spacious hall of the star-picking casino, none of them noticed their arrival. Dressed in silk or linen clothes, men and women of all ages, regardless of social class, were sitting or standing around dozens of big tables covered with brown blankets. They were nervously staring at the dice cups or the black triangle chips on the tables. It was extremely hot in midsummer. On the three sides of the hall, there were 7 or 8 female servants waving the long fans in their hands to blow the wind into the hall. However, because there were too many gamblers in the hall, the air was still a little stuffy. Mixed with the smell of expensive powder and tobacco and wine, a faint and exciting smell of ambition gradually came out. If it were not for the extravagant ice basin placed under each table in the casino, the smell would probably be stronger. The casino was not a charity. The purpose of investing was to make money. The more extravagant the investment was, the more money they wanted to make. Ning Ke looked at the details in the hall and looked at the dealers in the same cyan uniforms, becoming more and more nervous. He did not know the lower limit of betting here and did not know whether they had brought enough money. He went to the counter to exchange chips and asked about the minimum bet and the rules of the game. Feeling a little relieved, he took Sang Sang to look around the hall of the casino. When he saw someone leaving the table where the dice cup was, he squeezed in before the others without hesitation and looked directly at the table, ignoring the disgusted looks from the people behind him. Shaking the dice cup to see who was the biggest was probably the simplest and quickest way to determine the winner in the casino. What Ning Ke liked were the two characteristics of simplicity and quickness, whether it was killing people or gambling. In addition, he knew that this was the only way he could cheat, so he naturally stood there like a nail and refused to leave. The 3 dice were divided by 9 points, and the more dice were big and the less dice were small. If the dealer got 3 sixes, it would be the best. However, if the gamblers were brave or bored, they could naturally bet on the leopard. If they won, they would not only kill the gamblers at the table, but also compensate the gamblers on behalf of the banker of the casino. However, this kind of thing rarely happened in the casino. Staring at the big dice cup on the brown blanket, which was at least twice the size of an ordinary one, and the pretty female dealer waved her bare white forearm and rolled the big dice cup up and down like a magic trick, Ning Ke listened to the crisp and dense sound of the 3 dice in the dice cup, and the sound of the dice cup falling heavily on the table. Ning Ke slightly lowered his eyes and seemed to be hesitating. In fact, he had already begun to meditate. The psyche power in his brain passed through the ocean of chi and mountain of snow in his body, slowly and gently perceiving the breath of heaven and earth around him, and then perceiving everything around him through the breath of heaven and earth. This kind of perception was very wonderful. The invisible psyche power wave mobilized the breath of heaven and earth to spread out and fall on things, which would slightly deform the perception. This kind of perception was fed back to his psyche power wave through the breath of heaven and earth, and then entered his mind, forming a picture that was not clear, but he could see some details that were invisible to the naked eye. There was a fat hand on the brown table. It was the hand of the owner of a cloth shop. After the dice cup was set, he threw 50 silver taels worth of chips to Big and pressed the rest of the chips under his palm. 50 silver taels worth of chips was not a small amount, but the owner's expression did not change. Only the hand that was pressing the chips was slightly trembling. Ning Ke did not care about the gambler's psychological state. Although he often earned some money by gambling in the city of Wei, he knew that even the best gamblers could not win forever. Today, he came to the star-picking casino just to win a lot of money with those wonderful abilities, so he only needed to care about whether he could see things that others could not see. There is only the smallest chip of 2 taels of silver left, and he still behaves so calmly. Through the subtle feedback of the breath of heaven and earth, he saw the number of chips under the boss's trembling palm, and could not help laughing and muttering in his heart. The word "see" was not an accurate description. He could only vaguely feel the edges of the chips and the protrusions on them. There was no warm and smooth sensation to the touch, and there was no visual effect of seeing it with his own eyes in his mind. If a cultivator could cause such an effect by mobilizing the breath of heaven and earth, it could be imagined that there must be many cultivators in history who had nosebleeds every day, felt tired every night, and died of chi deviation because they peeped at the scenery of women's breasts every day, or fantasized about something soft and tender. The beautiful female dealer looked around gently, and opened the dice cup with both hands. The 3 dices at the bottom of the cup were 2, 3, 3, small. The cloth shop owner's palm on the table stiffened slightly. His 5 fingers grasped down, tightly holding the last chip. He forced a smile to the people around him, nodded, and walked out. At this moment, Sung Sung's small body finally succeeded in squeezing in. She squeezed to Ning Kei's side with difficulty, stood on her tiptoes, and looked at the pile of chips and the dice cup on the table with her willowy eyes, forcibly suppressing her nervousness. A slight and clear sound of the dices hitting each other rang out again, and a new round of gambling began on the table. The big dice cup rolled up and down in the fair hands of the beautiful female dealer, and then fell on the table. "Please make your bets." The female dealer looked at the gamblers around the table with a smile, and reread the rules of star-picking casino as she did at the beginning of every new round of gambling. "If you don't make your bets within the time limit, please wait for the next round." The big and small gambling table was in the shape of a semicircle. On the wide table, several betting areas were drawn with a thin white cloth. In addition to piles of chips and a few teacups, there was a small and cute hourglass placed in the middle of the gambling table. After every round, there would be someone to turn the hourglass upside down. Ning Kei glanced at the fine sand flowing quickly in the hourglass, and found that time was a little tight, so he quickly focused his attention on the big, black and heavy dice cup. Because he looked so attentively, the expression on the lad's face was particularly focused and nervous. Some guests at the table couldn't help laughing, and joked, "I don't know which family's kid came here to play star picking. Does he think he can break the dice cup if he stared at it for a long time?" Ning Kei didn't pay attention to the jokes around him, because he was very nervous at this time. Besides, could he tell these gamblers that he was going to break the big, black and bright dice cup? Just as he said to Sang Sang at the entrance of the casino, Ning Kei never fought a battle without preparation in his life. In order to win money today, he had spent the whole night yesterday experimenting. He felt how deep the water in the bucket was through the wooden bucket, how many taels of silver under the bed through the bedboard, and whether Sang Sang squatted under the window with her eyes open or closed. After repeated training, he was sure that he could control the weak chi of heaven and earth. Although it was impossible to shake Mount Tai, it should not be a big problem to see Mount Tai. Therefore, he came to the star-picking casino with confidence. As for the whole night of meditation, his speed and proficiency in mobilizing the chi of heaven and earth had been greatly improved, which was a benefit beyond his expectation. According to the battle plan made by the master and servant in Lin 47th Street and the poor practical experience, Ning Kei thought that the subtle chi of heaven and earth controlled by his psyche power could easily pass through the thick wall of the dice cup when he looked at the black dice cup, and then feel the wonderful depression on the surface of the dice. However, he never expected that the chi of heaven and earth he controlled couldn't go any further after entering the thick wall of the dice cup. Ning Kei's body suddenly stiffened, and he looked at the big black dice cup in shock, not understanding what had happened. At this time, the bottom of the cute hourglass in the center of the gambling table was almost full of sand. An impatient gambler at the table saw his appearance and began to urge him. He looked at the black dice cup in distress, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. According to his usual behavior, he should give up this game. However, he didn't know whether it was because of the hourglass and the urging, or the strong unwillingness in his heart, he didn't want to give up. He stared at the dice cup, frowned, and desperately increased the strength of his psyche power to control the chi of heaven and earth to stab into the dice cup, which was like an iron wall. Break! The chi of heaven and earth compressed to the extreme by the psyche power seemed to become a sharp invisible needle, and finally stabbed into the dice cup. Feeling the wonderful touch like a hot knife cutting into butter and fingers into cream, and seeing the 3 dice lying quietly at the bottom of the dice cup, Ning Ke suddenly relaxed and his tightly knitted eyebrows gradually relaxed. Just before the hourglass finished, he took out the small star that was folded into a silver note, and gently put it on the side of the table that bet on big. The beautiful dealer glanced at him with a smile, and slowly lifted the dice cup. 4, 5, 6. Big. The small star that was folded into a silver note was carefully spread out by the female dealer with her slender fingers, and then pressed on the center of the gambling table to show to the gamblers. Then she pushed the silver one by Ning Ke to them with a thin bamboo ruler. Even in the star-picking casino, it was rare to see 200 taels of silver being used to bet on big or small in the dice cup. In addition to the gambler's compensation, the dealer also had to pay a lot of money. The chips pushed by the thin bamboo ruler to Ning Ke were not divided into big or small. They were stacked up one after another, which looked quite attractive. A middle-aged man at the gambling table looked at Ning Ke and said with a smile, "You seem to be young, but you play big. You don't look proud even though you have won. You are really calm at such a young age." Ning Ke lifted his sleeves to wipe the sweat on his forehead, and shook his head with a smile without saying anything. He thought to himself, if you can see through the dice cup like me, you can naturally be as carefree as if you have seen through the mortal world in the gambling house. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 124. Those who had seen through the world of mortals, rather than those who pretended to see through the world of mortals and wanted to take the shortcut to Zhongnan, were basically hiding in the remote mountains and forests, or waiting for death in the remote and dilapidated temples. It was impossible for them to come to the busiest casino in Chang and for money and stare at the dice cup as if they were the enemy who killed their father. Ning Ke obviously did not think too deeply when he thought of that sentence. In fact, the situation on the gambling table did not give him time to think or reflect. With the sound of shaking the dice, the heavy black dice cup kept falling and being picked up. The chips on the gambling table in front of him were getting more and more. On the way, the female dealer changed several big chips for him, but she still could not stop the chips from piling up higher and higher, gradually becoming a hill. Playing the dice cup to see who was bigger or smaller, he won 7 rounds in a row. He gave his all in each round, and by the 7th round, he had already bet more than 1,000 taels of silver. Even in a place like the Ying'o Casino, which was used to seeing bloodshed, it was still rare to see such a magnificent scene with extreme luck as the foundation. There were more and more people around the brown gambling table, but fewer and fewer people around Ning Ke and Sang Sang. The gamblers could hardly suppress the fanaticism in their eyes, but they did not want to be too close to the lad in case of displeasing the casino. The female dealer was still beautiful and gentle, but the smile on her face had become extremely reluctant. She apologized to the gamblers and left, saying that she was tired. The casino sent a middle-aged dealer to replace her. The gamblers around the gambling table knew that the casino felt that the lad's luck or gambling skills were a little difficult to deal with, so they replaced the dealer. Some regular customers even recognized that the middle-aged dealer was the master of the Ying'o Casino, and exclaimed in surprise. No gamblers dared to bet with Ning Ke for a long time. From the 4th round, many gamblers followed Ning Ke to bet with different attitudes and won a lot of money. However, when they saw the middle-aged croupier and heard the discussions of the surrounding gamblers, most of them decided not to follow Ning Ke for the time being and decided to wait and see. Ning Ke had accumulated a lot of experience in the frontier fortress over these years, and he could be called the first master of gambling in the city of Wei. However, it was still impossible for him to compete with the real powerful dealers in Chang'an. But now, he did not rely on gambling skills to win the game, but on the skills of a cultivator, using the primal energies of heaven and earth to cheat. Then, as long as he did not cheat in the casino, no matter how skilled a gambling master was, how could he be his opponent? Was cheating allowed in the casino? Of course they could. But the Ying'ou Casino was one of the top 3 well-known places in the register of the Chang and local government. After all, it was not a small gambling house in a brothel. They would not resort to such means unless they had to. So, they could only watch Ning Ke win. After the middle-aged dealer entered the arena, Ning Ke won 3 consecutive rounds. The crowd of gamblers behind him could not hold it in any longer. They took out their chips and started to follow the trend again. As a result, the casino lost more and more money at a faster rate. However, the middle-aged dealer's slightly dark face was still calm. It was hard to tell if it had become darker. The crisp sound of the dice hitting the walls of the dice cup gradually disappeared. He slowly removed his hand from the dice cup and glanced at the hourglass that had just been turned over. Without looking at the other guests at the table, he looked directly at Ning Ke and said with a smile, "Guest, please leave your hand after you place your bet." Ning Ke held the thin bamboo ruler in his hand and slowly frowned. After a long silence, he stood up from the chair and put the bamboo ruler in the closest and smallest area to the middle-aged dealer. The chips in front of him had piled up into a small mountain. It would be very difficult to push the chips into the big and small areas in each round. So, after a discussion with the casino, they agreed that if he wanted to bet all his chips, he could use the bamboo ruler in his hand instead. At this time, he bet the bamboo ruler, which meant that he was betting all of his assets on it. The crowd around the gambling table suddenly exclaimed. These gamblers in Chang'an, who paid great attention to their manners, could no longer suppress the shock in their hearts and became no different from the military gamblers in the city of Wei who made a fuss. Leopard. Leopard. Why did he bet the leopard? Lower your voice. Did he win too much just now and was worried that something would go wrong? So, he deliberately lost some. What nonsense is that? Even if he deliberately wanted to lose, it didn't make sense for him to bet all his chips on the table. With the exclamations, the gamblers began to discuss in shock. However, the middle-aged dealer behind the table was not affected by these discussions. He calmly looked at Ning Ke, who slightly lowered his head and said in a gentle voice, "Guest, are you sure?" Ning Ke looked at the hill-like chips in front of him and was a little absent-minded. After being reminded by Sang Sang, he reacted and nodded. Of course, he could win more by betting on the leopard, but the probability was too small. Even the most daring gamblers dared not bet with Ning Quebec. Under the gaze of the crowd, the middle-aged dealer put his palm on the dice cup but did not open it for a long time, as if the dice cup was as heavy as a mountain. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked at Ning Ke with a slight smile, saying, "Let's make friends." Ning Ke didn't mean to urge him to open the dice cup. After hearing this, he understood the meaning of the casino. He smiled and nodded to express his gratitude. Then, he turned around and whispered to Sang Sang before leaving the table. It was not known when the beautiful female dealer reappeared. She respectfully stretched out her right hand and led the way for him. There was a luxuriously decorated room behind the counter of the casino. Ning Ke and Sang Sang were led to this room. As soon as the door was closed, the noisy discussions and praises outside suddenly disappeared. A slightly fat middle-aged rich man came out from behind the curtain. He bowed to Ning Ke with hands folded in front and said very sincerely, "I'm the shopkeeper of the Ying'ou Casino. We are very grateful that you are willing to make friends with us." Ning Ke left the table without asking the middle-aged dealer to open the dice cup, because he knew that he had won enough and he had to save some face for the other party. Before entering the casino, he had been thinking about how to leave after winning. Now that the casino took the initiative to extend a friendly gesture, he certainly did not hesitate to accept it. The previous guest won 4,400 taels of silver. The last game was indeed the leopard. According to the rules, the owner should lose all, Ning Ke said with a smile. I understand the rules. Go to the second round. This sentence was equivalent to giving tens of thousands of taels of silver to the casino. The shopkeeper of the Ingo casino suddenly became more gentle and said with emotion, my friend, you are really generous. Then I will add a round number for you on behalf of the casino and the owner to express my gratitude to you. The shopkeeper said with a kind face. If his enemies who had seen his sinister and cruel face in the past saw him being so polite to a gambler who had won more than 10,000 taels of silver from him, they would definitely be shocked. After a while, the casino changed all the chips that Ning Ke had won today into notes and sent them over. At the first time, he stopped Song Song's action of counting the notes with a stern look. But when he glimpsed the number 1,000 taels of silver on the thick stack of notes, he could not help but feel a little dry. The shopkeeper said with a smile, you are welcome to play at any time in the future. You are welcome. Ning Ke knew that the shopkeeper did not say it explicitly, but he was advising him in a euphemistic way, since we are friends, it is not a relationship on the gambling table. Welcome to play at any time means you are not welcome, and don't come to the Ingo casino in the future. Just when he was about to leave the Ingo casino with Sang Sang, the shopkeeper seemed to have just thought of something and suggested with a smile, if you think that is not enough, I have a good suggestion. There is a newly opened casino in the West City. It was changed from Master Junjia's former pawn shop. It is really a good place to go. The meaning hidden in these words was very obscure. The shopkeeper guessed that this lad must have some background and should be able to guess the meaning of his words. But he did not expect that although Ning Ke did not have any background, when he heard the name Junjia and thought of Chao Xiaoshu's introduction at Spring Breeze Pavilion, he immediately understood what Ning Ke meant. Now the dark world of Chang and was dominated by the Fish Dragon gang. Master Junjia was finished. The pawn shop under his name was changed to a casino and reopened. Just like the Ingo casino, there was no backer. Since Ning Ke dared to win so much money in the Ingo casino, why not go to the West City to win again? Standing by the window, the shopkeeper could not help but frown and shake his head, his heart full of unwillingness and anger, watching the young master and his servant walking toward the West City and gradually disappearing into the night. The door was opened, and the middle-aged dealer came in with the heavy big dice cup in his arms. Looking at the back of the shopkeeper, he sighed after a moment of silence, that lad is indeed a cultivator. The middle-aged dealer was a gambling master invited by Master Meng from the Great River Kingdom. He was only responsible for holding the fort and rarely participated in the game. Today, he was forced to do it in person, but he still lost happily. The dealer had an advantage in shaking dice. He believed that no gambling master in the world could beat him under the premise that he was the dealer. Besides, no swindler could hide from his eyes, so it was very clear what was going on with that lad. Thinking that he shook a leopard in the end, and in order to maintain the face of the casino, he was forced not to open the cup. His face became more ugly, and he shook his head and said, even if he is a cultivator, we are too polite. Master Meng has died. Our casino can be reopened because of the pity of the sixth Master Chen in the palace for the orphans and widows left by Master Meng, and the brothers in the gang who have no place to eat. Now we have to live with our tails between our legs. How dare we make trouble? What's more, you know that lad is a cultivator. What can we do to him? The shopkeeper reprimanded him in a low voice, and then without warning, he grabbed the black dice cup on the table and smashed it directly. There was a golden interlayer in the broken dice cup, and some patterns were faintly engraved on the interlayer. There is a soft gold interlayer in the dice cup, and it is engraved with runes. The shopkeeper said with a gloomy face, that lad can see through the dice cup, so he is at least a cultivator in the real state. What can we do except to obediently hand over the silver? The middle-aged dealer was stunned. He had been in the casino all year round and had a wide circle of friends. Although he was an ordinary person, he also knew the realm of cultivators. He thought that the lad was so young. Had he entered the no-doubt state? Why does such a person come to the casino? He said angrily, I'd like to see if he dares to be so presumptuous in Western City. Although Lord Junjie is dead, the backer behind the new casino is not someone ordinary cultivators dare to provoke. The shopkeeper did not answer him. He just stared at the dice cup on the table. Looking at the soft gold in the dice cup and the runes, the more he thought about it, the more unhappy he became. He murmured, since the founding of the Tang Empire, I have never heard of cultivators making money by bullying casinos, because it is too degrading for them to do so. A cultivator in the real state doesn't go to the mountain gate to meditate and practice hard, doesn't communicate with his peers, doesn't travel to famous mountains and rivers, doesn't feel the breath of heaven and earth, but comes to the casino to gamble. What is this? The shopkeeper raised his head, looked at the night outside the window, and said faintly, this is bullying. The 200 taels of silver in Song Song's old belt had now become a thick stack of silver. It was stuffed into her waist and looked a little ugly, but she did not care and giggled foolishly from time to time. Young master, are we really going to the casino in Western City? Of course. This way of making money can only be used once, so let's make as much money as we want. Logically speaking, a person like Ning Kei, who had experienced countless life-threatening situations, should know when to stop. However, he had been poor for too long. Now that he had found such a good way to earn money, he was like a poor villager who had been herding sheep in the west of the Yueluan kingdom all his life but could not even afford mutton. Now that he had found a treasure bowl that could keep jumping out of black sheep, how could he not use it? Even in the prosperous Chang'an city, more than 10,000 taels of silver was undoubtedly a huge amount of money. And if this amount of money was placed in the grassland, it was enough to make the horse gang beside Shubi Lake commit suicide before Ning Kei raised his knife. If it was placed in the city of Wei, it was enough to make those aunties who wanted to marry Sang Sang ignore Ning Kei's face and carry the bridal sedan chair to kidnap the bride. The thick stack of silver directly made Ning Kei dizzy. Even Song Song's thin and flat chest was full of grandeur at this time, and she wanted to win all the gambling houses in Chang'an City. Sure enough, there was a newly opened casino in West City. The signboard decoration was newer and larger than that of the Ingo Casino. Knowing that this casino was renovated by Junjie Shicheng's Chu pawn shop, Ning Kei was not afraid and broke in with Sang Sang. What happened next was no accident. He won money again and again. Now he had more experience and more money, so he won more quickly and fiercely. In a flash, the dealers of this new casino changed their expressions. After a discussion, they politely and threateningly invited him into the inner room and opened a new table of gambling. Anytime, anywhere. As long as the gambling house did not cheat, Ning Kei would always win. When he almost turned this new casino into a small workshop, the person behind it finally stood out. A fierce man in a green shirt, green boots and a green hat looked at Ning Kei coldly and said in a low voice, "My friend, Mr. Chi appreciates you very much and would like to invite you to have a cup of tea. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 125. A thin and tall man in a thin cyan robe was enjoying the wind on the highest stone wall of the West Gate Tower. Because he was too thin, his cyan robe seemed to be hung on a bamboo pole, fluttering in the night wind. The summer nights in Chang'an were hot and sultry. Rich families had their own maidservants to hold fans and fill their rooms with ice, while ordinary people had to open their doors and sleep on bamboo beds in the streets. Everyone knew that the higher one went, the colder the night wind would be. However, the Tang Imperial Palace and the majestic city wall were not easy to climb. But the thin man in cyan robe could, because his name was Chi 4, the leader of the fish dragon gang in Chang'an. Everyone in Jianghu knew that Chi 4 was ruthless. But it had to be said that he was the most useless one among the brothers at the top of the fish dragon gang. Now that Spring Breeze Pavilion, old Chow had left Chang'an and Chang 3 and the others had returned to the imperial court to work, he naturally took over as the leader of the fish dragon gang. Now, with a casual order from him, 3,000 cyan-robed men swore to die for him. In addition, everyone now knew that the fish dragon gang was a fish thrown into Jianghu by His Majesty. Even the government dared not neglect them. Undoubtedly, Mr. Qi was the only leader of the Chang and underworld, so it was not a big deal for him to enjoy the scenery from the city tower. However, facing the night wind, Qi 4, who was holding a pot of wine, did not feel proud at all. Instead, he looked gloomy. He took a sip of wine and sighed. He had successfully transformed from an ordinary underworld leader to a leader of the cultured underworld. He missed Cao Xiaoshu and his other brothers very much. However, Cao Xiaoshu had gone on a long journey, and Chang San and Chen Lu had official identities, so they could not meet at any time. Thinking of the good times of drinking and eating in the past, Mr. Qi, who was already famous in Chang'an, wished he could immediately return to the days when he was a follower. At this moment, a man came from afar on the city wall. He greeted the gate guards and hurriedly ran over. He lowered his head and said a few words in Qi Iv's ear in shame. With a puff, Mr. Qi spat out a mouthful of wine. The wine turned into a fine mist and fell outside the bottomless city wall. He did not know if it would startle the rock eagles nesting on the city wall. He stared and asked, could it be wrong? There's no mistaking it. I've already sent someone to Ingo to inquire. That brat went there first and won more than 10,000 taels of silver. Mr. Qi still didn't believe it. He touched the back of his head and said hesitantly, cultivators go to the gambling house to make money? How could there be such a shameless person? Why does it sound so strange? That subordinate said with a bitter face. No one believed it, not even the head shopkeeper at Ingo's side. But in the end, didn't he still obediently hand over the silver, and then hurriedly send a message to us? Mr. Qi believed that his subordinates did not dare to deceive him, so he confirmed that a cultivator was shamelessly making money in his gambling house. Thinking of his elder brother's order before he left, he couldn't help but change his face. He threw the small flagon in his hand into the darkness outside the city wall and said fiercely, make him spit out the money, or let our brothers chop him. Damn it, he is not a sublime being in the see-through realm. Do you think that I can't chop you to death just because you know some tricks? Although he said so, he could not do it. The fish dragon gang had always been particular and tough. If Mr. Qi was really driven into a corner, he could really ask his 3,000 brothers in cyan robes to chop that cultivator to death. But the problem was that cultivators must have their own sections. He had to take a look at the background of that bastard cultivator before making a decision. The city wall of Chang'an was extremely high. It was not easy to climb up, and it was also very difficult to run down. When Mr. Qi ran back to the gambling house from the city gate, he was already exhausted and out of breath. And during this period of time, that bastard cultivator had won more money. Hearing the news, Mr. Qi's face became more and more unfriendly, and his mood became worse. But when he saw the person who pushed the door and entered, his mood and expression became extremely weird. He wanted to laugh but also wanted to cry, but he couldn't cry. He thought to himself, what the hell is going on? Hearing the three words, Mr. Qi, Ning Ke pushed the door and entered. As expected, he saw the man in cyan robes who looked like a bamboo pole. Ning Ke's expression instantly became very interesting. He thought to himself, although we are familiar with each other, in fact, we are not that familiar. Well, for the sake of Cao Xiaoshu, I will give you a 50% discount on all the previous accounts. His reaction was so fast that he actually made 3 turns in one sentence. He thought to himself that if he acted too familiar with this man, he would be too embarrassed to take the money he won. But if he pretended to be completely unfamiliar with this man, he was afraid that the man would really turn against him. He knew very well that the Fish Dragon gang was not to be trifled with, so he finally used the name of Cao Xiaoshu. Mr. Qi was stunned by his words, and he was so angry that he almost laughed out loud. He glared at Ning Ke and said angrily, "Are you sure you want the money you won from the gambling house?" Ning Ke thought to himself, although we are familiar with each other, we have only met each other twice, so we are not that familiar. Do you have the nerve to refuse the money? In fact, if it involved a small amount of money, he did not mind pretending to be a brother and a hero in front of Mr. Qi. But he had won more than 70,000 taels of silver before. For more than 70,000 taels of silver, he did not mind pretending to be dead and let Sang Sang sell herself on the street to be buried. How could he care about the old friendship and generosity? He looked at Mr. Qi, coughed twice and said, "When we first met, Mr. Qi, you said that as long as you are alive, I can do whatever I want in the eastern city. This is the western city." Mr. Qi retorted angrily. Then he stood up and took out several land deeds and contracts authenticated by the government from a locked box. He threw them on the table in front of Ning Ke and said, "Anyway, this gambling house is yours. You can do whatever you want to do if you want to win." Ning Ke felt that he seemed to have misheard something. He rubbed his ears and asked, "Whose gambling house is this?" Mr. Qi poured a cup of tea and said angrily, "I told you, this is your gambling house." Ning Ke picked up the contracts on the table and glanced at them. Sure enough, he saw his name at the bottom of the contract. He suddenly froze on the spot and looked up at Mr. Qi with his eyes full of shock and confusion. "My eldest brother told me many things before he left, one of which is about you." "What is it?" "He said that you have been poor for too long these years. You have been poor for too long. That night, you dared to follow him to kill people regardless of anything just for 500 taels of silver. It's really terrible. How can a hero bow down to 5 buckets of rice?" He also worried that you would be so stupid to be a killer after being poor, so he prepared some property for you. Mr. Qi looked at Ning Ke, who was shocked and speechless as if he was a ghost. He shook his head and said angrily, "Now it seems that my eldest brother's worry is really King prescient. A cultivator actually came to the gambling house to cheat money. What the F*ck is this? I say, you have been poor for so many years that you have gone crazy, haven't you? Done. Sleep. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 126. Go Xing and Ning'o. I couldn't tell them apart. They were all changed to Go Xing and Ning'o. It was the ancient dragon's fault. Looking at the deed in his hand, Ning Ke felt a strange warmth in his chest as he thought that the man in the indigo robe had left a casino for him. He asked, "Where is he now?" "When I received his last letter, he said he was going to Mount Tai to watch the sunrise." Mr. Qi answered. The warmth and shock gradually subsided. Ning Ke felt his cheeks burning as he thought of Mr. Qi's sarcastic words and how he cheated money into his own casino. After all, he was a young man and couldn't bear such a humiliating experience. In order to resolve the embarrassment, he said angrily, "No one from the Fish Dragon gang told me about this." Mr. Qi raised his eyebrows and glared at him, saying angrily, "Before my eldest brother left, he took us to Lin 47th Street to meet you. At that time, he told me that you could come to me whenever you wanted. It has been a few months. When did you come to me? Now you have that identity. How can I take the initiative to find you?" It was only then that Ning Ke remembered his other identity. Commander Su Chongshan had thrown him a black wooden token when they met and never contacted him again. He had long forgotten that he was still a secret guard of the empire. While he was sighing with emotion to cover up his shame, Mr. Chi suddenly thought of something strange in this matter. He raised his eyebrows that had just calmed down and looked at the lad in shock, saying, "You are a cultivator. I know you are good at killing people. But when did you start to cultivate and enter the real state?" "It just happened 2 days ago. I'm just at the initial awareness state. I'm still far from the real state." Ning Kai did not know that there was a layer of talisman gold in the black dice cup of the star-picking casino. He answered honestly, "I wanted to make more money when no one knew about it. Although I can't make money now, please keep it a secret." Mr. Chi's voice became sharp and worried. "You won more than 10,000 taels of silver from Goxing Casino. How can you keep it a secret? Chang'an is a big city, but not many people can run around with a little black handmaiden. You can be found out with a little inquiry." Ning Kai smiled and said gently, "You are now the boss of Chang'an City. Isn't it easy for you to let go of such a trivial matter? Do you think the star-picking casino would dare to go against your orders and continue to investigate me?" Mr. Chi couldn't refuse his flattery. He frowned and thought for a while, saying, "It's not difficult to hide it, but what's the point of hiding the identity of a cultivator? Don't tell me you're hoping that this matter will blow up and help you gain some fame in the empire. If that's what you mean, I suggest you don't think so. After all, Chang'an is not a rural city. You can easily find hundreds of cultivators. You can't be too conspicuous. In my opinion, you'd better explain to the instructor of the academy. It's more important to get some practical benefits." Ning Kai thought of the legendary second floor of the academy that would open next year and General Xiahou, who was at the distant frontier for the empire at this time. After a moment of silence, he smiled and replied, "Because I know I'm too ordinary, I don't have to say it out and cause trouble. It's okay to say it out when I can go further on this road in the future. You're not a member of the Fish Dragon Gang. You can do whatever you want. But since I rarely meet you today, I'd better finish the formalities as soon as possible." Mr. Chi stretched out his slender fingers and pointed at the land deed in front of him. He said, "There's a transfer agreement that needs your signature. From now on, this casino will be transferred to you. I don't have to waste my energy to manage it on your behalf anymore." Ning Kai thought that this couldn't work. A casino needed manpower, money, and background. He was going to study in the academy, so he couldn't let little Sang Sang wear a dealer's uniform to manage a dozen gambling tables. He rolled his eyes slightly and said with a smile, "My good brother, please continue to manage it. I really don't have the ability or the time." After a dispute, Mr. Chi finally failed to resist Ning Kai's continuous flattery and shameless spirit. He had no choice but to agree to Ning Kai's conditions. The casino was still Ning Kai's, but it would be entrusted to the Fish Dragon Gang. Ning Kai didn't need to do anything but get the monthly dividends according to the proportion agreed by both parties. After the negotiation, Ning Kai left the newly opened casino in the West City with Sang Sang immediately without having supper or calling over girls. He left in such a hurry as if he was fleeing for his life. Even when he returned home on Lin 47th Street, he remembered that he didn't even remember the name of the casino. Sang Sang took out the thick stack of banknotes from her belt and put them into the box. She looked around the shabby bedroom. Her willow-like eyes kept wandering from beam to beam and mouse hole to think of the safest place to put it. In the end, she lifted the bedboard according to the old way and carefully hid the box in it. Looking back, she saw Ning Kai sitting on the armchair in a daze. The expression on his face was very complicated and wonderful, as if he was dumbfounded by the cornucopia in the sky, or as if he was hit so hard that he wanted to cry. "Young master, you are a little strange today." Sang Sang looked at him and asked curiously, "Just now, when you left the casino, you looked as if you owed someone 800 taels of silver. You were so embarrassed." "How could I not be embarrassed? I've been so embarrassed today. I've never done such a stupid thing in my life. Ning Ke answered angrily. I am worried that the instructors of the academy will be angry if they know. At the same time, I have decided to withdraw all my masterpieces from the front shops from tomorrow onwards. As for the business, I will buy some cheap scrolls from poor scholars from the fragrance workshop to sell, and earn some difference. Sang Sang threaded the needle and thread through the insole and pulled it hard. She opened her mouth to bite the thread and tore it. Then she asked with puzzled eyes, not even one scroll to be sold. Young master, doesn't this seem a little like the poor suddenly getting rich? Ning Ke was stunned by her words. He coughed twice and said, the adjectives you used are not very good. This is not called the poor suddenly getting rich, it should be called being content with a little bit of wealth. Of course, it is not good for the poor suddenly getting rich, and it is not good to be content with a little bit of wealth. Then I will hang a few of my works in the front shop, but the price will be raised, and I will not sell them for less than 1,000 taels of gold. Sang Sang thought to herself, young master, your most expensive painting was only sold for 20 taels of silver, and even the most expensive one was sold. That day, you specially ordered me to cook a pot of braised pork to celebrate that I finally made a fool of a rich man. Now you say that your scrolls will not be sold for less than 1,000 taels of gold. Although there are indeed many stupid and rich people in Chang'an, how can there be so many fools? Looking at the strong puzzled look in the little girl's black eyes, Ning Ke raised his eyebrows and explained with a smile, remember, we are too rich now, and we are not short of that little bit of wealth. This is like buying a horse's bones with 1,000 taels of gold, and it can increase our reputation. According to his instructions, the next day, Sang Sang removed most of his scrolls from the old brush pen shop, and then went to the fragrance workshop to buy a lot of new works of calligraphers. When there were customers who liked Ning Ke's scrolls and inquired about them, she would honestly tell them that the owner's handwriting was extremely precious, so it could not be changed by 1,000 taels of gold. The development of the situation was different from what Ning Ke had expected. Marking his calligraphy at 1,000 taels of gold did not make the reputation of the old brush pen shop soar. Instead, the shop's business became worse and worse. Other than receiving a lot of cynicism such as, is the boss of this shop crazy because of poverty, there was no other gain. However, now that the master and the servant had suddenly become too damn rich from the poor, it was really like the poor suddenly getting rich. Even Sang Sang did not care much about the income of the old brush pen shop, and Ning Ke was busy reviewing his lessons in the academy every day, and was busy going to the old library to ask his friend about the various Dharma access in the cultivation world. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 127. There were 6 subjects in the academy, and each of them was troublesome. For Ning Ke, mathematics, riding and archery were naturally at his fingertips, but the remaining 3 subjects, etiquette, calligraphy and music, were torturous to him. Etiquette and calligraphy could be memorized, and he believed that as long as he regained a heart that loved his grades more than money, he would definitely be able to overcome this obstacle. However, those musical instruments were not his forte, and they were not his favorite. Every time he held a flute in the study room and was speechless, he could not help but think of Chen Pippi's previous 2 messages. In those messages, Chen Pippi had unceremoniously compared him to an eyeless, stupid piece of wood, and a flute that could not be played. Looking at the flute in his hand, he had to admit that this was probably some kind of restriction that Haotian had placed on him. He wanted to graduate from the academy and enter the 2nd floor. He had already missed a semester exam, so he naturally could not sit out every exam and be a hero with a blank paper. There was no hope for music, so he was especially diligent in learning the other 5 subjects. Other than the academic pressure, there were other reasons that made him so hardworking. Since the semester exam, most of the students in the academy, including most of his classmates in classroom 3, thought that he had given up the exam, feigned illness, and was extremely unbearable. Although they did not mock or ridicule him in front of him, not many people were willing to talk to him. Their gazes and behavior were full of avoidance and alienation. It did not matter if he was ignored or deliberately given the cold shoulder. He was not a person who would warm his face to the cold buttocks of others. Since he was faintly excluded from the group of the academy, then he would study seriously. However, sometimes when he walked alone in the academy, he would still feel a little down. At this time, he would comfort himself with the cold eyes of his classmates after he became a provincial triple merit student in his previous life. As the saying goes, the tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind, the pile on the shore will be destroyed by the current, and those who are better than others will be criticized by others. As the saying goes, the bean that sticks out is always the first to rot, and the fattest pig in the pen, bah. Ning Kai fiercely spat into the shallow wetland filled with fine grass. He raised his chin and ignored his two classmates who wanted to ignore him. Carrying the paper bag in his hand, he leisurely walked towards the old library. Walking up to the second floor of the old library, he bowed to the female professor respectfully and put the paper bag on the table by the west window. He walked to the bookshelf and glanced at the thickly dotted cultivation books. Although he could sense the breath of heaven and earth and even won a lot of money, it was a pity that these books were still as difficult to understand as the wordless heavenly book. He could only remember the strokes, but still could not store any word in his mind. He took a thick copy of the Dictionary of 10,000 Arts Appreciation and sat down on the floor under the west window. He looked at the blazing sunlight outside through the window crack and began to read it without much interest. Time passed by. When he reached the 17th page of the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong, the blazing sunlight quietly disappeared through the window crack. The old library was shrouded in darkness, but he did not get up to leave. The beautiful female professor by the east window had finished today's hairpin-style small regular script. She packed up her writing brush, ink, paper and inkstone, gently rubbed her wrist and stood up. Seeing Ning Kai leaning against the wall and staring at the thick dictionary in a daze, she could not help but smile gently. She did not remind Ning Kai that it was already late and just quietly walked out of the old library. As the night deepened, the talisman inscriptions on the bookshelf glowed with a faint luster. Ning Kai was not frightened, but stared at the talisman inscriptions seriously. He watched as the luster disappeared in a flash, and the talisman inscriptions returned to their original white and crude appearance. Then, he watched as the bookshelf slid away from the wall without a sound, and a fat lad came out, panting. This was the second time Ning Kai and Chen Pipi met each other after countless messages. When they first met that night, Ning Kai was on the verge of death and unconscious. When he woke up in the morning, he was too tired and did not take a good look at Chen Pipi's appearance. However, he did not want to miss this opportunity today and stared at Chen Pipi with his bright eyes for a long time. "I say, you are really fat." Ning Kai looked at Chen Pipi and exclaimed, "I really don't know what you've eaten in the past 16 years. How could you be so fat? But fortunately, you're round and firm enough, so you don't look wretched or disgusting. But there is one thing I really don't understand. Are you really the only talented lad in the academy entrance examination of the academy in 100 years to get 6 A+ grades? You also got A+ grades in driving? Where can the military ministry find a military horse that can carry you and run so fast?" Chen Pipi's big round face was full of shame and anger after hearing such a long paragraph of words. His soybean-like eyes flashed with anger and he said angrily, "Driving, driving. I chose driving." Ning Kai suddenly understood and sincerely praised, "That's a very wise choice." Chen Pipi covered his forehead and did not bother to pay attention to him. He directly asked, "What do you want to see me for?" Ning Kai smiled gently and said, "Let's talk about those trivial things later. I brought you some food. As he spoke, he took out a few big white steamed buns and some pickled vegetables from the paper bag. He warmly said, "Let's talk while eating. The small pickled vegetables in the Academy's kitchen are good. I don't know if you have any on the mountain. The steamed buns are a little cold. I don't know if you can get used to it and if you can eat your fill." Chen Pippi looked at the food on the ground and refused to sit down. He said incredulously, "I know you have a favor to ask of me, but I really didn't expect you to only bring a few cold steamed buns and pickled vegetables. How is this the attitude of asking for help? I say, you should at least bring a few bowls of crab porridge. The crab porridge in the kitchen has to be paid for separately. It is not included in the accommodation fee. Why waste it?" Ning Ke laughed and continued to ask him to sit down. "And let's not use such ugly words as asking for help. It should be considered as learning from each other." "Learning from each other?" Chen Pippi scornfully looked at him and said, "Do you think you are qualified to learn from each other?" Ning Ke continued to beckon him to sit down. He seriously replied, "I have just started my journey. But who knows who will go further on this road in the future? If you treat me better now, I will return the favor in the future. You won't be at a disadvantage. Besides, I can teach you math, right?" Chen Pippi was really confused by his words. He proudly snorted and sat beside him. He reached out to pick up a cold steamed bun and a handful of pickled vegetables, putting them into his mouth and eating. "Why do you always act at night? Isn't it better to meet during the day?" Ning Ke asked. Chen Pippi answered vaguely while chewing the steamed bun, "Senior sister Yu has been practicing regular script here during the day. How dare I come here? You have to understand that the Academy's rules forbid us from helping students outside the building. I risked being beaten by senior brother to leave a message for you. Why don't you express your gratitude? Aren't I treating you to a steamed bun?" Ning Ke replied with a smile, "I know the Academy's rules are strict. Those instructors often use their old fists to beat people. Why do I feel that you are more afraid of second brother?" Chen Pippi glanced at him. He knew that this guy was curious about the situation in the back of the mountain of the Academy. He sneered and said, "Compared with second brother's fists, the Academy's rules are too gentle." They were both 16 or 17 years old and had a huge appetite. The two of them devoured the steamed bun and pickled vegetables like a whirlwind. Chen Pippi then stole the female professor's kettle by the east window and drank 2 mouthfuls to moisten his throat. Then he rubbed his belly and looked at Ning Ke, pretending to be indifferent. He said, "Tell me, what do you want to know today? If you want to know how to enter the second floor, then forget it. Although the headmaster loves me very much, I can't say anything about such important things. We've known each other for a long time. Do you think I'm the kind of person who wants to reap without sowing?" Ning Ke laughed disdainfully to hide his disappointment. He then said, "Today I want to ask you something. I can sense the breath of nature now. What should I do next? You've just entered the initial awareness state. You should cultivate your mind and stabilize your cultivation first. Don't be greedy." Chen Pippi explained very seriously. Suddenly, he frowned and his right hand, which was secretly making emblematic gestures behind his back, froze. He slowly raised his head and looked at Ning Ke's eyes. He asked hesitantly, "You've only opened 10 acupoints?" Ning Ke honestly said, "I tried to look inside last night, but the picture in my mind was too vague. The ocean of qi and mountain of snow were like 2 ink balls. I really couldn't see how many of the 17 acupoints were opened. Today, I also want to ask you to help me take a look." Chen Pippi shook his head and sighed. "There's no need to look. Indeed, you've only opened 10 acupoints. You're standing on the line between life and death. If your willpower is slightly weaker, it's definitely impossible." He looked at Ning Ke expressionlessly. He thought to himself that this guy had eaten such a precious heavenly power pill. Although he didn't know about it, he was sure that this guy must have had other adventures and finally changed his fate by forcibly opening his acupoints. This was already an anomaly in the world. However, such an anomaly had only opened 10 acupoints. It was a pity and pitiful. Ning Kai didn't show any resentment on his face. After a slight pause, he smiled and said, "It's much better than knowing nothing at all. You don't have to be completely disappointed. Those who can enter the second floor are not necessarily geniuses in cultivation." Seeing that he didn't feel remorseful, Chen Pipi felt the need to comfort him. He patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, "The master never chooses disciples based on their cultivation potential. If you can reach the pinnacle in other aspects, you might be able to catch the master's eye. When that happens, you won't be able to not enter the second floor even if you don't want to." Ning Kai knew that he was comforting him and smiled gratefully. His gaze subconsciously fell on the row of bookshelves behind him. He knew that behind the bookshelves was the passage to the legendary second floor. He just didn't know if he would be so lucky in the future. Or, would he really have to pry open the bookshelves like the female professor had said? He retracted his gaze and continued to ask, if the state of initial awareness is to sense the existence of the breath of nature, then how do I use it next? I can already sense the existence of specific objects through the breath of nature, but I can't move them. I'm not greedy, I'm just curious. You can sense specific objects? Chen Pipi stared at him with his small round eyes. Yes. Ning Kai counted with his fingers and gave an example. On the first night, I sensed the candlelight, then the pillow, the paper, the bed, the silver, the leaves in the yard, and a bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup. Chen Pipi's eyes widened even more. He thought to himself that to sense specific objects, one needed to be in harmony with the qi of heaven and earth, and also needed to communicate with the qi of heaven and earth. Only in this way could one sense the outside world through the qi of heaven and earth. This was something that could only be done in the state of perception. How could you do it? This chapter has been edited. I'm starving. I'll continue after eating a bowl of instant noodles. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 128. Chen Pipi scratched his head and asked confusedly, "Are you sure you sensed something like candlelight, pillow, paper, noodle soup? Are you sure you didn't open your eyes?" Seeing that he obviously didn't believe him, Ning Kai frowned and explained, "Yes, I didn't open my eyes, and I couldn't see it through the wall and the bedboard. Oh yes, last night I went to a friend's casino in Southern City to play for a while. I could clearly feel the dent on the dices through the dice cup. Isn't that perception? You couldn't see through the dice cup, so of course it counts." Chen Pipi tilted his head and looked at Ning Kai thoughtfully. Ning Kai didn't notice that Chen Pipi's gaze was a little strange. He couldn't help thinking about what happened in the casino last night and how he promised Mr. Qi and Sang Sang that he wouldn't cheat in that way anymore. He looked back at Chen Pipi and wanted to say something but stopped. After a while, he couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Is there any way to move the dices through the dice cup?" Chen Pipi was shocked and stared at him as if he was looking at a ghost. He angrily rebuked, "You can finally cultivate after changing your fate, but you only want to move the dices to cheat? Is there anyone like you in the world? What a waste of God's gift." At this moment, this young cultivation genius, who was extremely envious of Ning Kai and Haotian's care, finally couldn't suppress his emotions anymore. He rolled up his sleeves and wanted to beat Ning Kai up. Seeing his action, Ning Kai waved his hands and explained, "I was thinking that if I could move the dice through the dice cup, it would mean that I could mobilize the qi of heaven and earth to control other things. I was just trying to find an easy-to-understand example that could be appreciated by both young and old." "Why are you so angry?" Do you really think I'm stupid enough to gamble with the chi of heaven and earth? Hearing this sincere and credible explanation, Chen Pipi angrily sat down again. He angrily glared at Ning Ke and then controlled his temper to explain, the initial awareness state is the virtual state. One can only feel or communicate with the chi of heaven and earth, but he can't affect the real world through the chi of heaven and earth. Only after entering the no-doubt state of reality can cultivators condense the chi of heaven and earth into lines or bridges and touch the outside world through the air. A sword master can control a flying sword and a warrior can hurt people through the air. Ning Ke said thoughtfully. Not bad. Chen Pipi continued, if you want to control the dice through the dice cup, you must first enter the real world. No doubt state is the third state. Ning Ke shook his head and sighed, I can't reach it in a short time. Chen Pipi glanced at him with a strange expression. He was too lazy to reveal certain matters. He said, even if you have entered the corporeal realm, you cannot use the primal energies of the universe to control anything. Cultivators who have the ability to control all things are truly great cultivators. They can only do this after breaking through certain invisible laws. Could it be that there are other rules for the practitioners in no-doubt state to control foreign objects? Of course. I've heard you say that you've seen a battle between cultivators before. Have you ever seen a swordsman reveal 3 rows of flying daggers when he lifts his robes? Have you ever seen those Buddhist disciples make 36,000 bronze Buddhas to smash people? Ning Ke recalled the 2 cultivators killed by Cao Xiaoshu that night at the Spring Breeze Pavilion. The swordsman from South Jin Kingdom indeed only had 1 sword. After the sword was broken, he died. The sadhu from Yueluan Kingdom had more weapons beside him, but they were only a copper bowl and a string of prayer beads. Cultivators in no-doubt state and see-through state have their own exclusive perceptual objects. If you want to enter the real state from the emptiness state, you must first cultivate your own exclusive perceptual objects with psyche power, which is also called natal items. Ning Ke asked confusedly, what is natal item? I've only heard of natal year. The sword of a sword master is his natal sword. The most important thing for a talisman master is his natal talisman. At this time, the sword and talisman are his natal items. Then what is the natal item of a psyche master? If you can only understand the common way of explaining it, then you can understand it as the psyche master himself. Chen Pipi answered angrily. Suddenly, he remembered the words Ning Ke mentioned earlier and asked confusedly, what is natal year? Do you know what an ellipsis is? I don't know, and I don't want to know. As for why cultivators had to have their own natal items, you first had to understand 2 things. First, the world was filled with primal energies of the world. Even the smallest space, a rock, a withered willow, a lake, they all contained their own primal energies of the world. Second, a cultivator does not rely on the chi of heaven and earth to directly affect the matter in the world. Instead, he must use the chi of heaven and earth as a bridge to transmit the psyche power produced in his spiritual world to the object, and then trigger the vibration of the chi of heaven and earth inside the object. If that's the case, then why must there be an exclusive object? Let me use the example given in the first message. The psyche power in a cultivator's body is like the breath, and the snow sea and chi mountain are the flute and bamboo flute. Only when the flute makes a sound that can be heard and understood by the chi of heaven and earth can one perceive the chi of heaven and earth. But the problem is that the quality of the flute and bamboo flute is different for everyone. The broad chi of heaven and earth can be understood, but it doesn't mean that the chi of heaven and earth in the lake, wood, stone, and water can be understood. A cultivator seeks and cultivates his own natal item, which is to find an object that can understand and listen to his music. Do you understand such an idiotic explanation? I roughly understand. Is it like the principle of resonance? What's resonance? Chen Pipi rubbed his fat face tiredly and ignored the boring interruption. He continued, when a cultivator enters the real state, the more compatible the natal item is with his breath, the easier it will be for him to improve his state in the future. But it is too difficult to find a natal item that is completely compatible with his breath, so many cultivators choose to carve talismans on it to distort the characteristics of the object, and then cultivate it with their own psyche power for many years until their minds are connected. Thinking of the terms Liu Qingchen mentioned in the carriage, Ning Ke knew that Chen Pipi was telling the truth. He scratched the back of his hand and asked with a smile, that is to say, if I want to be a sword master, I have to first get a good sword, then hug it to sleep every day, and finally cultivate a little affection. It's up to you if you want to understand it so idiotically. Chen Pipi said unhappily. Hey, you were the one who said telepathy first, okay? Ning Ke waved his hand and suddenly thought of an important question: how many natal items can a person have? What is your natal item? Why should I tell you my natal item? Chen Pipi stared at him and said, the stronger the ability, the more subtle the state, and the more qi of heaven and earth you can understand, the more natal items you can have. For example, in the upper see-through state, the subtle state or the knowing destiny state, you only need to know the breath of trees to control trees, and you only need to know the breath of lakes to control lakes. But for ordinary cultivators, they will only choose one to ensure the effect. If I choose to hug the sword to sleep every night, will I still be able to control the dice? As long as you have enough energy to study, it's easy to play with these little things. Hey, why are you still thinking about this? It doesn't seem like an example. It's just an example, just an example. Don't think too much. From late at night to early morning, the 16-year-old fat lad continued to teach and answer questions for the 16-year-old who was also a beginner in cultivation, completely forgetting the academy's rules and his own reminder. He spoke very seriously, and the other listened very seriously. All kinds of principles in the cultivation world were explained in simple terms. Since childhood, he had lived in the lofty unknown place of the West Hill Divine Kingdom. After leaving home, he meditated and cultivated every day in the back of the mountain of the academy. For 16 years, he did not care about worldly affairs and did not know what intrigues and intrigues were. The genius Chen Pipi was proud and arrogant, but the heart in his plump body was so crystal clear and pure that it moved people. Since childhood, he had lived in the miserable grassland of Min Mountain, where it was difficult to survive. After the age of 4, he had been killing people every day in the rain of blood. He had experienced countless life and death experiences in the past 16 years, and under the fresh and joyful face hid vigilance and indifference. Unfortunately, Ning Ke was not moved at all that night. It was not until many years later that he realized how lucky he was at that time. The next day, Ning Ke returned to his home on Lin 47th Street at dusk. He asked Sang Sang to close the shop and prepare dinner. Then he went back to his bedroom and sat on the armchair by the window, staring at the green tree in the narrow courtyard in a daze. Being in a daze was meditation. At this time, he was slowly releasing the psyche power in the spiritual world through the snow mountain and ocean of qi, exploring the things in the courtyard one by one. According to the method taught by Chen Pipi, he maintained a clear and happy heart and purely followed the aura of the psyche power to find the things around him that could connect with his mind the most. Weak but extremely pure psyche power emanated from his body. He felt the fluctuation of the breath between heaven and earth, and then kept moving. He sensed the newly embroidered insole on the windowsill, the ants crawling under the tree, the banknotes and silver ingots in the box under the bed, and many other things, but he did not receive any response. The qi of heaven and earth existed in all things in the world. According to Chen Pipi's teaching, the internal qi of all things would have a natural resistance to the cultivator's psyche power. However, if an object could feel the kindness and joy in the aura of the cultivator's psyche power, and if the two could coexist harmoniously, then there would be a response. Kindness and joy. Should I go to the front shop to find some ink and paper to try? As he was thinking about this, he suddenly heard Sang Sang's cry from outside the window, followed by a string of bell-like laughter. He opened the window in confusion and saw Sang Sang, who was drawing water and washing rice by the well with her back facing him. Her little hands were waving behind her waist to block, and she said anxiously, "Young master, don't tickle me, it's itchy." Through the window, Ning Kei looked at Sang Sang, who kept twisting her waist to avoid Sang Sang's touch, and was shocked speechless. It would make sense if Sang Sang, who had grown up with him, was the one who had the most telepathic connection. But was he going to make her his natal sword? Absolutely not. Thinking of a certain possibility, he gasped and shook his head repeatedly. If he really did that, then when he met General Xiaohu in the future and was beaten to a pulp, would he have to pinch the sword formula and shout, "Don't be so arrogant, you thief, look at Sang Sang." Wahahaha, I'm not going to write the first chapter. It's too fun and too tiring. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 129. At the critical moment of life and death, he could rely on Sang Sang, but not Sang Sang. Ning Kei sat by the window and watched the little girl in a daze. He wondered if he really had to go to the front shop to get close to the brush, ink, paper and inkstone to decide on a natal item. But the brush he was used to was a brush, not a judge's pen, the ink was pine ink instead of stone, the inkstone was mud, and the paper was bud paper. How could he use them to make weapons? Moreover, these were the things of scholars. It would be inappropriate to let the brush, ink, paper and inkstone fly all over the sky to fight with cultivators. When thinking about these difficult questions, he held something in his hand and kept playing with it. There was too much silver in the old brush pen shop. Sang Sang had used to spread silver all over the bed, and most of them had been exchanged for notes. Notes were not as good as silver ingots, so he kept a new piece of snowflake silver and played with it every day. The snowflake silver was slightly cool and smooth, and it was much more comfortable than those peach stones and stone balls for a poor lad who suddenly got rich. In the following time, Ning Kei kept a clear and kind heart and kept trying to find a natal item that matched his psyche power. During this period, he successfully made the candle shake and extinguish, and also made a corner of the paper on the wardrobe fly away. But he still could not find a suitable one. This situation lasted until late at night. The cicadas chirped, and the summer heat was not weak. The dim, bean-sized candle on the table was constantly releasing endless heat. The master and his servant, who were wearing thin robes, sat at the table and stared at each other. They did not speak for a long time. Sang Sang rested her head on her arms and leaned on the edge of the table. She opened her willowy eyes and stared at the slowly moving silver ingot on the table. She said firmly, "Young master, although this piece of silver does respond strongly to your psyche power, I still firmly oppose it. What if you throw it out in a fight and can't take it back? An ingot of silver is 20 taels. We will lose all our family property in a few years." The next day, Ning Kei went to the academy and stayed in the old library until late at night. He waited for the bookshelf to move and Chen Pipi came out. Ning Kei sprung up from the ground and told Chen Pipi about his experience in Lin 47th Street. Then he asked a question that seemed very important to him: "Why can't I remember the contents of these books? Didn't senior sister you tell you?" The cultivation books in the old library were all written by former grand cultivators with psyche power. Every character in the books was the best of the divine talisman master. Only when you enter the upper state of see-through can you see through the hidden meaning. You are still far away from that state. Ning Kei thought of the female professor's reminder to himself and Xia Qingyun that day. He scratched his head and sighed. He suddenly thought and looked at Chen Pipi and asked, "Then are you in the upper state of see-through state?" Chen asked. "No. Chen's answer was very indifferent, and did not look. Ning Ke now knew the temperament of his peer very well. Because of his calm expression, Ning Ke guessed that his real state should be above the upper grade of see-through. He could not help but feel shocked. He thought that Mr. Liu Qingchen only stepped into the see-through state when he was old and weak, but the fat lad in front of him had already surpassed the see-through state and entered the knowing destiny state. So young, you are really a peerless genius. He looked at Chen Pippi's big round face and sighed with admiration. Although you don't look like a genius, and you don't look like a grand cultivator in knowing destiny state. Chen Pippi was speechless and did not know how to respond. He thought, are you admiring me or mocking me? Knowing that this guy was actually a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state, Ning Ke was in awe. He always felt that he was talking to a sage-like old man with a white beard. He said respectfully, I say. Genius brother, since you are such a genius, you must be able to solve my dyslexia. Please give me more advice. His voice was gentle and sweet, and his flattery was not hidden. It seemed that Chen Pippi really liked it. He smiled proudly and said, the characters need to be seen as a whole, because each character is a world with its own soul. You can avoid being hurt by the meaning of the characters by deconstructing them with the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong. But you can only see some fragments of this world, and naturally can't be stored in the spiritual world. If it's an ordinary person, he won't be able to understand these books if he hasn't reached the superior level of see-through. But in my opinion, you might really be able to find some side roads, and this road still lies in your Yong 8 characters method. Ning Ke moved to his side and put on a posture of listening attentively. You are good at calligraphy. You can use the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong to deconstruct these characters into strokes. You can try to remember the order and number of strokes unintentionally. Then when you leave the old library, you can use the method of writing to recombine them in your consciousness. In this way, the characters are still the same characters, but they have already got rid of the meaning above the structure given by the divine talisman master who copied the books. Ning Ke seemed to be thinking. Chen Pippi reminded him, I just put forward a possibility. Whether it will succeed or not, you still need to carry out countless attempts. The final result may be successful, or not. It's better to have a try than to have no way at all. Ning Ke suddenly thought of the attempt he made according to the method taught by Chen Pippi last night. He stood up excitedly and took out a flint to light a candle. Then he put the candle on the table by the west window and returned to the original place, saying, Look at the result of my practice. As soon as he finished speaking, the middle and index fingers of his right hand formed a sword. He waved his arm and stabbed the candle on the table from afar. His psyche power seeped out of his body and controlled the chi of heaven and earth to follow his fingertips. There was no sound of thunder, nor was there any great movement of heaven and earth. The dim candle on the table swayed a few times before quickly returning to its calm state. It was as if it had only been blown by a few strands of summer wind that had leaked in through the west window. Chen Pippi frowned. After a moment of silence, he shook his head and said, Weak. After a night of hard work and sensing the objects in the courtyard, he finally developed such an ability. But in the end, he only got a faint word from his companion. Although he knew that Chen Pippi was a cultivation genius and his current state was as dim as the candle on the table in front of him, Ning Ke still felt a little unhappy. He took out a piece of silver and slammed it on the floor in front of them. He said angrily, Look at this first and then make a comment. After a moment, Chen Pippi widened his eyes and stared at the slowly moving silver ingot on the floor. He said incredulously, This feeling is not bad. I say, how greedy are you? How much do you like silver? Ning Ke forcibly suppressed the pride in his heart and rubbed between his eyebrows that were stuffy because of the excessive output of psyche power. He said calmly and carelessly, I'm not greedy. Brother Silver knows that I pity them. In other words, these silver know that you're stingy and don't want to spend them. That's why they responded to your psyche power with joy. You're not just weak, you're so weak. Chen Pippi looked at him with a sneer and said, if you want to cultivate the silver ingot into your natal item, it's up to you. Although I haven't seen any cultivator play like this before, I have to remind you that you've already used all your strength. This silver ingot can only struggle for a while like a dead white maggot. What's the use of it? After another wasted midnight, Chen Pippi returned to the back of the mountain from the old library. Stepping on the stone path that was shrouded in fog, he could not help but sigh when he thought that he had wasted precious cultivation time on that guy. The night fog in front of the stone path suddenly dispersed, and a tall figure suddenly appeared. Although it was deep in the night and the vision was extremely dark, one could still clearly see that this person's black hair was combed very neatly, and the golden silk ribbon on his waist did not move an inch. The rather ancient hat on his head was as still as the eaves of a palace hall. Why did you go to the old library every night these days? Which book in the library can't you remember and have to read at night? Don't tell me that you went to check the ancient Zhou Writes classics again. Chen Pippi looked at his most respected second brother, bowed with a bitter face, and reported truthfully, Senior brother, I went to the old library because I met a friend in the front yard. So I went to chat with him. Second brother said with appreciation, a gentleman's friendship depends on sincerity, regardless of the state. Although you are a classmate in the front yard, you are still a classmate. It's worth a reward for you to overcome your habit of sleeping and eating to accompany him. But you should remember the rules of the academy. You'd better not talk nonsense. No way. Chen Pippi raised his head and cried out. Don't you know how timid I am, second brother? How dare I leak any information to the classmates in the front yard? We just talked about some math questions. Hearing the words, math questions, second brother, who looked serious and square, suddenly thought of the question that Chen Pippi brought back to the back mountain one day. Thinking of the painful time he spent day and night in the room thinking hard about math behind the back of his junior brothers and sisters, his eyebrows and eyes trembled a few times, which was very rare. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, so it's that guy. Because he didn't want to recall that painful time, and he didn't want to think of the number of answers that he couldn't write down even though there were piles of paper in the room, second brother turned around and went to the stone ground with a gloomy face. Chen Pippi thought of something and quickened his pace to catch up with second brother. Panting, he followed second brother and said, second brother, there's something I want to ask you. What is it? There's a guy with very poor cultivation potential. Out of the 17 acupoints in the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow, he only opened 10 acupoints. 14 days ago, he was barely able to sense the breath of heaven and earth and enter the initial awareness state. But now he is inexplicably able to perceive foreign objects, and he even has 1 foot in the no-doubt state. Is he a genius? Second brother suddenly stopped and looked back at Chen Pippi coldly. He guessed that Chen Pippi was talking about the juvenile classmate in the front yard. After frowning for a moment, he replied with great certainty, of course, he is not a genius. Why? From the initial awareness state to the perception state and then to the no-doubt state in 14 days. There can't be such a genius in the world. This kind of person can only be a monster, because it took me 15 days to complete this process. When second brother said this, there was no complacency or pride on his face, but the hidden meaning in his words was extremely proud and confident. It took him 15 days to break through 3 states, so it was impossible for anyone in the world to do the same thing in less than 15 days. Looking at second brother's neat black hair, Chen Pippi's heart was full of respect and admiration. He thought that it took him 17 days to break through 3 states after taking the heavenly power pill. Second brother was enlightened in a rural place like Linquan town, where there was neither a wise teacher nor a Taoist sect, but it only took him 15 days. He was really more vigorous than a peerless cultivation genius like himself. Chen Pippi praised and asked curiously, what about eldest brother? Eldest brother, he is also a monster. Second brother seemed to recall some old pain. He stretched his hands to his head and adjusted his slightly tilted ancient hat. He said solemnly, eldest brother was enlightened at the age of 13, and then he was in a daze at the back of the mountain of the academy for 17 years before he understood the meaning of the no-doubt state. He entered the no-doubt state at the age of 30. Chen Pipi said incredulously, eldest brother is too. Second brother looked back at him and said disdainfully, too what? Too stupid. Eldest brother reached the no-doubt state at the age of 30, but it only took him 3 months to understand the see-through state. Of course, at that time, I was already at the upper grade of the see-through state. After saying this, he was silent for a long time. Then he looked up at the night fog between the mountain path and sighed deeply. He said, that day, eldest brother understood the see-through state in the morning, and entered the knowing destiny state by watching the sunset clouds in the evening. He passed the most exquisite 2 states in one night. The teacher praised him at that time, saying that he understood the Tao in the morning and entered the Tao in the evening. I am no match for him. In the night fog on the mountain path, the voice faded away. Second brother of the academy and Chen Pipi, who claimed to be geniuses and were indeed geniuses, were silent for a long time when they recalled the moment when the scholar showed his face under the sunset clouds. The road of cultivation in the world was long, and the higher one went, the more difficult it was to climb. Many cultivators who were regarded as geniuses at a young age could reach the initial awareness state and perception state at the age of 5 or 6, and entered the no-doubt state or even the see-through state at the age of 16 or 17. However, once they entered the see-through state, it was like falling into a swamp, and it was difficult for them to make any progress for decades. But eldest brother of the academy, who only entered the no-doubt state at the age of 30, was not talented or smart, and even seemed a little stupid. But he could understand the see-through state in 3 months, and the most terrifying thing was that he entered the see-through state and knowing destiny state in one day. This kind of creation was really incredible, and there might not be another person like him in the whole cultivation world. After a long time, second brother looked at Chen Pipi and said calmly, eldest brother is gentle and kind, and a real gentleman. He accumulated a lot of experience, and once he was enlightened, he soared to the sky. His accumulation is so deep that you and I can't reach it. Chen Pipi nodded repeatedly. He was in awe of second brother, who was strict and solemn, but both of them were extremely proud and congenial, so he knew some stories about second brother. Tonight was the first time that he knew that eldest brother, who was gentle and generous to his subordinates and respectful to his teacher, wore an old robe, held an old book, and tied a water ladle, and looked more like a servant of the academy, turned out to be such an extraordinary person. He could not help but nervously start to reflect on himself. In the 2 years before eldest brother traveled with his teacher, did he ever show off in front of eldest brother shamelessly? This chapter has 4,000 words, so it is more than 10 minutes late. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 130. Chen Pipi followed second brother across the stone platform and went up along another stone path in the mountain through the fog. It took him a long time to digest the shock that eldest brother gave him, and then he couldn't help but think about the first question. Second brother used 15 days to break through 3 states, I used 17 days, and Ning Ke only used 14 or 15 days. Is he really the same as us? Or did he start to meditate hard from the day he was born, and the psyche power was stored in his brain? Now he changed his fate and opened his acupoints, and the psyche power gushed out to help him break through 3 states. This time, should be counted from the day he was born. But if so, eldest brother had held it for 16 or 17 years to enter the no-doubt state, and he was 16 or 17 years old this year. Why did it seem that he was also very great? Thinking of Ning Ke's shameless words in the old library, No one knows who will go further on this road in the future, and thinking of the faint echoes between eldest brother and second brother of the academy and himself, Chen Pippi's fat body trembled slightly. He turned pale with fright and thought, what if that idiot surpasses me in the future? What will happen? Out of the 17 acupoints in the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow, 10 of them were opened. Even if his psyche power accumulated for 16 years was pure and thick, he could only play a dull, dry, and unpleasant song. The breath of nature that he could control was too weak. As long as he couldn't enter the knowing destiny state, even if he reached the top of the see-through state, he could only make paper flowers fluttering in the sky, perform magic tricks, or steal some silver ingots from the official warehouse. How could he catch up with me? Oh, poor Ning Quebec. Even if you set foot on the road of cultivation, with your small body in the trickle-like breath of nature that you can control, you will still be beaten. Having figured this out, Chen Pippi was greatly relieved. He smiled and thought that he still had to remind that guy in the future. Otherwise, he would really think that he was a genius in cultivation and play around. It would not be good if he was killed by a real powerhouse. The two of them walked to the front of the residence. Before second brother left, he suddenly asked, did it really only take 14 days? Chen Pippi lowered his head and counted seriously with his fingers. He thought of the night when he saw Ning Ke dying. He did not know if he should calculate the Acupore's connection at that time or earlier or after he fed him the heavenly power pill. The key was when his snow mountain would be rebuilt. He raised his head and said respectfully, it could be 14 days or 15 days. If he woke up in the morning, then it should be 15.5 days. It should be around today. Second brother stared into his eyes seriously and said, younger brother, how can a man live his life in a muddle-headed manner? As for Situelan, she knew that His Highness appreciated Ning Ke, so she believed that Ning Ke did not lie about his illness to avoid the exam. But she could not say too much for him in this atmosphere. Ning Ke's temperament would not allow him to humble himself and beg others to get close to him. Since no one was willing to pay attention to him, he would quickly leave the study room when he heard the bell, go to the kitchen to get some food and go around the pond to read books in the old library. As a result, he had less and less time to contact his classmates, and they became more and more strangers. In this way, the soldier from the border town who had shocked everyone with 3A+ grades in the academy entrance exam, the desperate student who forced Xie Qingyun to vomit blood when he entered the second floor, and the handsome lad who had a great reputation in the House of Red Sleeves, gradually faded into the crowd. To be more precise, he had become a person forgotten by the academy. Now, the topic of young students in the academy focused on the exquisite essay written by Linchuan Wangying, the beautiful poem written by Zhong Dajuan, the student in the course of magic skills named Chen Ximiao who broke through the perception state the day before yesterday, a student recommended by the military ministry in dormitory B beat the instructor in the course of toxicology yesterday, and Miss Situ scolded Chu Zhongtian again, the outstanding talent from the South Jin Kingdom, Xie Qingyun, was naturally the focus of countless people in the academy. After getting 5A+ grades in the semester exam, he contributed 2 shocking topics to the academy. One was that someone saw him snuggling with Jean Wuxia, the granddaughter of the Tang libation, on a stone bench by the wetland on a night in late summer. The other was the news from the course of magic skills that Xie Qingyun had finally broken through the perception state and successfully entered the no-doubt state. Professor Chao Jifeng commented with satisfaction after personally checking him, saying that the boy had a greater chance to enter the second floor next spring. The days passed by peacefully. A cool breeze blew down a few yellowish leaves. Autumn finally arrived. Ning Ke, dressed in the autumn uniform of the academy, walked out of the kitchen with his head down and walked towards the old library. When he was about to pass through the alley of the academy building complex to the wetland, he found a group of people talking together in front of him. The heroic male student in the middle seemed to be the center of the group. Ning Ke remembered that the young male student was called Chang Jingming, who came from the Yulin Royal Guards and was also recommended by the military ministry like himself. He had faintly heard some classmates' discussion. It was this person who hit 10 targets in a row in the course of toxicology and beat the instructor once. Now he was also in the limelight in the academy. Ning Ke directly walked past the edge of the crowd. He did not expect that after he passed by, Chang Jingming's expression became serious and said in a low voice, "Ning Ke, we are all recommended students by the military ministry. Do you want to muddle along like this? It's not something we, the Tang army, would do." Ning Ke stopped and looked back at him. After a moment of silence, he said with a smile, "Although we are all recommended students by the military ministry, once we enter the academy, we better not call ourselves Tang soldiers. And I believe that no one dares to spit on my face. As for muddle-headedness, it's just your opinion and has nothing to do with me." Chang Jingming frowned and said, "If you want to prove yourself again, you should not give up the opportunity to prove yourself. As long as you are willing to participate in the course of toxicology, I am willing to give you a chance to challenge me. Is this a charity?" Ning Ke looked at him and shook his head. He said, "It seems that you don't know what I said to Xie Qingyun and the others in the study room that day. I am not a flower in a greenhouse. I don't need some wind and drizzle to prove my perseverance and ability. When you were guarding the palace in the Yulin Royal Guards, I was guarding the frontier fortress. The military ministry recorded how many horse gang heads I beheaded. I don't need to rely on other things to prove myself." After saying this, he turned around and left. Chang Jingming looked at Ning Ke's back with an extremely ugly expression. Ning Ke's refusal to take the exam on the pretext of illness made the recommended students of the military ministry feel ashamed. The Tang army cared more about glory than life. Chang Jingming really could not understand what Ning Ke was thinking. Walking out of the lane to the wetland, Ning Ke noticed that there were 2 female students under the tree, pointing at the lake and smiling. However, the slender girl's smile was obviously a little forced, and there was a touch of envy and sadness in her eyes. Chu Yuxian had told him that this girl had an uncle in the palace, and few people in the academy dared to provoke her. He could not help but feel a little surprised, wondering what could make her so complicated by the lake. Following their eyes, wild ducks were swimming peacefully among the green grass of the shallow lake. Not far away, a young man and a young woman stood side by the lake. The young man was handsome and had an extraordinary bearing. It was Xie Qingyun. The young woman was gentle and beautiful. It was Jean Wuxia. The two stood by the lake and whispered from time to time, looking at the center of the lake with a smile. A gust of early autumn wind blew the corner of the academy uniform and skirt, which was really pleasing to the eye and floating like fairies. The enviable immortal couple on the campus, the slightly sour affection of the girl watching from afar. Ning Ke quietly looked at the people by the lake, and those who looked at the people by the lake, smiled and shook his head, and left again. These days, his mood was getting calmer and calmer. He was indifferent to the neglect and exclusion of the academy classmates, and even enjoyed the peace, because his mentality had changed fundamentally from the previous 16 years. After going through many hardships, he finally set foot on the road of cultivation and saw a more exquisite and broader new world. Compared with it, the love and hate in the secular world naturally became much more indifferent. Since he had already set foot on the road, he was sure that he could go far, far. Those hidden towers, those mountains, and those seemingly powerful and indestructible enemies would become the scenery on the road as time went by. In this case, how could he not be calm? There was no lack of beauty in the world, and there was no lack of eyes to discover beauty. But only with a calm enough sight could one discover the beauty that could not be discovered before. In Ning Ke's eyes, the scenery of the couple by the lake was very beautiful, even if that man was Xie Qingyun. In his eyes, the scenery of the academy was very beautiful, even if the academy was about to forget him. These days, in addition to reading and cultivating in the old library, he spent a lot of time walking alone in the academy because he was excluded by other students. In the eyes of others, his figure was a little lonely and pitiful. But only he himself knew that the academy was really beautiful when he was alone, especially those places that only he knew. Walking along the stone path beside the wetland and bypassing the old library to the direction of the mountain, Ning Ke found a large untrodden lawn behind a row of dense trees. In the center of the lawn, there were many unknown trees. Those trees were tall and steep. Not knowing whether it was because of the strong wind in the mountain, most of the trees were smooth, with only a few sparse branches sticking out at the top. Hundreds of tall trees gathered together looked like countless huge wooden swords inserted in the center of the lawn, densely packed, extremely amazing, and could be called a magnificent scene. Walking into the woods, Ning Ke randomly chose a tree and sat down. Leaning against the smooth and slightly protruding trunk, he took out a handwritten notebook from his arms and began to read it attentively. The notebook was the first part of the brief introduction to the 5 states of cultivation. A few days ago, he finally succeeded in using the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong to deconstruct and reorganize the classics in the old library. Being able to temporarily remember those words in his mind, he naturally made a copy for himself without hesitation. This forest was very far from the academy and separated from the wetland by 2 dense forests and 2 large lawns. On weekdays, few people came here, so he did not worry about being seen by others. He frowned and carefully read the words on the handwritten notebook. After a long silence, he murmured, "I can float pieces of paper, move candlelight, and move silver ingots. Have I also entered the no-doubt state? I heard that Xie Qingyun also just entered the no-doubt state. Then why are these little kids so excited?" At this moment, a gentle and quiet voice sounded behind him. "Xie Qingyun is less than 20 years old. It's really not easy for him to enter the no-doubt state from the perception state. It's reasonable for the students in the front yard to be happy for him. As for you, you have a lot of adventures. Pippi is kind and willing to help you, so it's reasonable for you to enter the no-doubt state." Ning Ke was suddenly shocked. Then he calmed down after hearing the voice. He hurriedly got up, patted off the grass on his buttocks, and bowed respectfully to the female professor beside the tree behind him. He said, "It's you." The female professor walked out from behind the tree. She had a petite figure and a youthful face, but she exuded a gentle and mature aura. The contrast between her appearance and her temperament made it impossible to tell how old she was, which made her even more charming. She looked at the lad and sighed, "I've been practicing regular script in the old library for 20 years, and you've been bothering me every day. I like this unyielding sword forest the most in the academy. But now you appear here again, which really gives me a headache." Ning Ke looked at the female professor whom he had known for half a year but still did not know her name. His eyes suddenly turned. "Don't think that every encounter is an adventure." The female professor looked at him and said with a smile, "I won't teach you anything. If you really need me to teach you in the future, I will teach you without you asking. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 131. Ning Ke was embarrassed that the female professor had seen through his thoughts. He touched his head and smiled. The female professor looked at him and said with a smile, "You don't have to avoid me. I just come to this forest occasionally." Ning Ke asked respectfully, "Miss, why do you like this forest?" The female professor was silent for a while. She put her hands behind her back and looked up at the autumn leaves in the forest. She said indifferently, "Many years ago, someone was enlightened in this forest. He was the only person I truly admired in the academy. Maybe some aura of that person is still left in this forest. That's why I feel a little happy every time I come here. The only person you truly admired? Ning Ke was confused and asked, is it the headmaster who was enlightened here? The female professor smiled and said nothing. Ning Ke looked at her back and suddenly found that the slender female professor was looking at the sky with her hands behind her back. She looked magnificent. He scratched his head and said, if that senior was still in the forest, you might become friends with him. The female professor shook her head and said softly, if I could meet him, I'd like to see if his sword aura is really that magnificent. Hearing the words, magnificent, Ning Ke thought of the Haran sword in the old library for no reason. But he still had no clue. There is a gist of trueness in the forest. Since you can understand the scenery here, don't waste it. Look around. The female professor looked back at him and said, cultivators don't want to compete with others. But you can't go astray by reading and admiring the scenery. How can you show your ambition by being indifferent? Next autumn, the Tangs in your batch will go to the frontier fortress to practice. You should lay a solid foundation in this year. Otherwise, it will be a pity if you die on the battlefield. Ning Ke sincerely bowed to accept the advice. Suddenly he thought of the word she said and asked curiously, you're not a Tangs. The female professor shook her head and walked out of the forest gently. Ning Ke looked at her beautiful back and asked, Miss, I still don't know your name. My name is Yu Lian. Yu Lian. It was an ordinary and even tacky name. Ning Ke wondered how such a dignified academy professor could have such a name. He suddenly thought of the question he had been having these days and could not help but pluck up the courage to ask loudly, Sir, may I know how old you are? Yu Lian smiled. She did not stop or look back. She said softly at the edge of the woods, if I remember correctly, it's very impolite to ask a woman her age. Looking at the disappearing figure of the female professor outside the forest, Ning Ke laughed at himself and thought, if it weren't for the fact that you look like a 16-year-old and your gentle and graceful temperament like a 30-year-old, how would I have thought of asking this question? The autumn scenery was beautiful. The sky was high and the clouds were light, making people feel relaxed and happy. The forest was dyed red by the blush on the young girl's face, and the morning frost cleared the dusty hearts of the people. Ning Ke studied and cultivated in the academy calmly. He was not as eager as before and gradually understood the world of cultivation. He patiently tried to concentrate his psyche and became intimate with the candlelight, paper and silver ingots. He was not in a hurry to find his natal item. Occasionally, he chatted with Chu Yuxian, discussed math problems with Situelan in a corner where the academy students could not notice, and derogated with Chen Pipi by leaving messages. Occasionally, he brought 2 bowls of crab porridge to talk with Chen Pipi. There was no hatred or blood, only learning and waiting. He waited for his strength to slowly improve and his enemies to gradually relax and grow old. He waited for the arrival of winter in autumn. After winter came spring. In spring, the second floor of the academy would start to accept students, and he would return to the frontier fortress in the autumn of next year. After killing people with a hatchet at the age of 4, he finally had time to live, not just to survive. In his memories, except for the absence of Sang Sang, this period of time in the academy could even be said to be the most peaceful and happy days of his life. The mountains at the border of the Tang Empire and the Yen Kingdom also welcomed autumn. The troops stationed between the valleys and the plains of the 2 countries could not feel any peace and happiness. Although there had been no major war for many years, it was a hard job to be stationed at the border. This place was located in the north, and once autumn came, the temperature dropped sharply. Everyone's hands were frozen red. Looking at the bleak scene of falling leaves, they did not have the mood to enjoy the autumn scenery. In the early morning, 2 men dressed in the Yen Kingdom crossed the border and walked into the Tang military camp. This was the place where the Tang Empire's most valiant border troops were stationed. It was also the place where the main tent of the general of the army was located. The defense inspection was extremely strict. The two middle-aged men had the handprint of the secret agent issued by the military ministry, and it took them a long time to pass through the layers of inspection in the military camp. Walking into the intelligence division's room in the camp, the younger of the two turned around to look at the grand central tent not far away. His gaze landed on the fluttering military flag at the top of the tent, and a cold glint flashed through his eyes. After entering the tent and making sure that no one was eavesdropping, the other middle-aged man looked at his companion coldly and scolded in a low voice, "The imperial court sacrificed a lot to get the secret agent's handprint from the Tang military ministry from Chang'an City. Today's assassination can only succeed, and there is no room for failure. Be careful, you should not have looked at the side." The young Yen man's face was full of disdain, and he said, "It's just a butcher's ear. Do you think I can make him feel that someone wants to assassinate me just by looking at him from afar? There are countless people in the world who want to kill the butcher, but he is still alive." The middle-aged Yen man looked at him coldly and said, "The distance from here to the main tent has been accurately calculated by the Privy Council, and it is enough for us to launch a sneak attack. But have you ever thought that if we can sneak attack him, he can also sense our presence? Don't be too careful," the young Yen man said unhappily. At this moment, the middle-aged Yen man's expression changed dramatically, and he looked out of the tent in disbelief. Although this place was not too far from the nearest state capital of Liang State, due to the strict military discipline of the Tang Empire, the border with the Yen Kingdom was even more tightly guarded. This time, before the midwinter arrived, the army was pressuring the border to intimidate the enemy, so no officer dared to return to the state capital without permission. Tens of thousands of tents were set up by the border soldiers, and among them, the tent that was as majestic as a hill, with the military flag fluttering on it, was naturally the main tent of the tens of thousands of border soldiers. There were no soldiers patrolling outside the tent, and it was as quiet as the back garden of a noble's mansion in Chang'an City. The light inside the tent was extremely dim, and a windproof oil lamp was hanging on the tent wall, gently illuminating the bed covered with expensive furs. A middle-aged man was lying between dozens of expensive furs. The man was wearing a plain undergarment, and his eyebrows were as thick as black silkworms, and his lips were as red as thick blood. Under the thin clothes, his burly body was like steel, and even in a deep sleep, there was a murderous intent. The middle-aged man seemed to have sensed something, and opened his eyes to look out of the tent. His face was indifferent, and his eyes were like lightning. "There is only one day left, let's all work hard. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 132. The middle-aged Yen man did not see the two lightning-like eyes in the tent far away. However, as the most powerful psyche master living in seclusion in the west of Yen, he was extremely sensitive to the fluctuations of the qi of heaven and earth. Instantly, he felt as if there was a coldness coming from the deepest part of the earth, penetrating the tent and invading his body. His expression changed drastically. With a muffled grunt, he made the first move. His skinny hands spread out in front of his chest and abdomen, forming a mudra. His palms were mottled with blood, like two bright red wintersweet flowers in late winter. Psyche power gushed out through the air. The air in the tent far away was drawn by this surge of psyche power and suddenly rolled up like a storm. The middle-aged general who was sitting quietly among the dozens of expensive furs frowned slightly. The expensive fur under his body split open and rolled up as if it had a life of its own. The leather of the bed sheet was torn into ropes by the violent psyche power. They swayed like snakes and instantly bound his body, making him sink deeper and deeper. These seemingly terrifying ropes were actually unable to bind the middle-aged man at all. What was truly effective was the thick qi of heaven and earth that was attached to these ropes, as well as the formless and powerful mental power. The young man was a great sword master who had just become famous in the Yen kingdom. Before the age of 30, he had stepped into the middle grade of see-through. He could be called a cultivation genius, so it was inevitable that he was proud. However, looking at his companions beside him who looked as if they were facing a formidable enemy, he knew that his side had already been discovered by the enemy. Thinking of the enemy's violent and powerful reputation, he did not dare to be careless. His eyebrows were like swords, and he bit the tip of his tongue to spit out a mouthful of blood. His fingers pinched the sword formula and the blood came out. He used all his cultivation in one move. The flying sword hidden in the sheath beside him was unsheathed with a clang. With a flash of light, it turned into a silver dragon and tore through the tent in front of him. It pierced through the darkness that shrouded the military camp before dawn and pierced into the flickering tent of the central military. The middle-aged man in the tent looked indifferent. He let the ropes, and leather, which contained the vigorous chi of heaven and earth, bind his body with the invisible and powerful psyche power, and let the torn expensive furs flutter in the air around him. His steel-like body under the thin clothes showed no sign of moving. He frowned as he stared at the whistling flying sword. He looked at the untraceable and unfathomable sword shadow that was as powerful as a flying dragon. Suddenly, he frowned and revealed an extremely disdainful and indifferent smile. Those ropes that contained the chi of heaven and earth, and those invisible mental powers had shrunk the thin underwear of the middle-aged man into pieces. The dragon-like flying sword had already reached less than 3 feet in front of him, whistling shrilly. In the next moment, it was about to pierce into the space between his eyebrows. The situation was extremely dangerous. At this moment, the middle-aged man's sculpted lips tightened. With some boredom, some contempt, and some tiredness, he casually said a word, "Break." The word "break" came out of his lips. It was clear and thick, but not very loud. However, just as the sound reverberated in the tent, the slowly flowing black clouds above the military camp suddenly sped up. A gray sky shone on the ground, and the clouds exploded with a loud thunder. Boom! No one knew whether the thunder came from the clouds or from the indifferent lips of the middle-aged man. It roared and instantly occupied all the space in the Tang military camp. An irresistible presence shrouded the wilderness. The flying sword that had pierced into the tent suddenly trembled as if it had been hit by an invisible hammer. It trembled and let out a wail, struggling to turn around and escape. However, the middle-aged man's eyes were like lightning, and his words were like thunder. What in the world could be faster and stronger than lightning? With a faint cracking sound, the flying sword that was as vigorous as a silver dragon a moment ago was directly smashed into scorched black iron pieces. In an instant it was broken into dozens of pieces that flew everywhere, piercing through the tent and disappearing into unknown places. The pieces of expensive fur flying in the air seemed to be immobilized. They suddenly floated quietly in the air. The ropes that tightly bound the middle-aged man broke inch by inch like a snake that had been cut by a sharp knife. They fell to the ground lifelessly and could no longer control him. This thunderous roar from the middle-aged man's lips did not end there. Instead, it continued to rumble through the military camp. The majestic and unparalleled power once again surged out. In the next moment, the majestic and sturdy central camp violently exploded like a leather bag that had been filled with too much wine. Countless fragments of the tent mixed with the contents of the tent and flew out. Then, a small tent next to the tent was overturned and exploded into pieces. The Tang bodyguard inside rubbed his eyes and looked at the high sky helplessly. Before he could figure out what had happened, he was frightened by the terrible explosion behind him and subconsciously crawled to the ground. One by one, the tents of the Tang army burst open and flew away. The thick soil on the border seemed to be blooming flowers. Starting from the ruins of the tent of the Tang army, it moved in a straight line to the south. Wherever the line pointed, whether it was tents or stables, they all collapsed in an instant. What was amazing was that the people and horses inside were not injured. In a flash, the majestic and powerful power came to the end of the line, which was the tent of the intelligence department where the two Yen people were hiding. The middle-aged man of Yen felt the power coming toward him and knew that the two of them had no time to react. He subconsciously looked at his young companion who was trembling beside him with pity and then shook his head. The wind blew and the small tent was instantly torn apart. The neck of the middle-aged Psyche master from Yen Shi was suddenly broken. His shaking head was directly shaken off his body and exploded like a ripe watermelon. Only the horrible blood cavity was left and the body fell forward with blood splashing. The other young see-through strong man from Yen Kingdom had 2 streaks of blood in his desperate eyes. Then his whole body slowly collapsed like a sand sculpture blown by the wind and became a horrible pool of flesh and blood on the ground. The warning bell rang hurriedly. The Tang border army responded with high efficiency and quickly strengthened the defense of the position. The cavalry on the left began to prepare their swords and horses and pressed forward towards the Yen territory. Deep in the camp, however, it was still orderly. The personal guards of the general in full armor walked among the ruins expressionlessly, looking for possible enemies. Suddenly, whether it was the personal guards who were looking for spies, the ordinary soldiers who were cleaning up the ruins of the tents, or the horsekeepers who were comforting the frightened military horses, they all stopped what they were doing at the same time. They stood straight and raised their right arms to their chest. They looked at the middle-aged man in awe and saluted in unison, "General Xiahou." The sound of steady footsteps rang out in the barracks as the middle-aged man indifferently walked over. At this moment, he was already wearing a set of shining armor. One could faintly see some kind of indecipherable rune inscribed on the armor. These black lines of rune inscriptions did not dilute the killing intent of the armor. Instead, they added an indescribable sense of power to the armor. He was one of the 4 generals with the most power in the Tang military. He was the great general of the army, Xiahou. General Xiahou was a strong man at the peak of martial cultivation in the world. His muscles and bones were like steel. Coupled with his ice-cold expression, ruthless and cruel military methods, and fearless military style, he was invincible in the north of the continent for 24 years. He helped the empire to open up new land and intimidated the enemies. He was highly regarded by the imperial court and respected by his subordinates. In the hearts of the people of Yen who had suffered a lot, this general of the Tang kingdom was simply a human devil. The tents of the intelligence department that were torn into pieces had become ruins. His subordinates cleaned it up as fast as they could and then surrounded it with cloth. They respectfully invited the general to inspect it. Xiahou looked at the headless body of the Psyche master of Western Yen. After a moment of silence, he said, 24 years ago, you were the commander of the vanguard of the Yen kingdom. After you were defeated by me, you fled the battlefield in fear. I heard that you have been hiding in Western Yen all these years. I did not expect that after so many years, you actually have the courage to assassinate me again. After saying this, he indifferently lowered his head to look at the pool of flesh and blood in front of his boots. He contemptuously mocked, a little sword master in the middle level of see-through actually dares to provoke me. You're really looking for death. At this time, a middle-aged man in civilian clothes calmly walked forward. After a respectful bow, he handed over a few pieces of broken things with both hands and said in a low voice, "There is no problem with the military camp's defense. These 2 Yen assassins could sneak into the military camp and do such a crazy thing because they carried the seal issued by the Chang and military ministry." Hearing this information, Xiahou quietly looked at the middle-aged man's eyes and did not speak for a long time. If it had been another subordinate, he would have been trembling in fear under the calm eyes and silence of the general and would have knelt down to beg for forgiveness without asking for the reason. However, this middle-aged man, whose name was Gu Shi, had a mysterious origin and was good at strategy. He handled documents and private affairs for Xia Ho and was Xia Ho's most trusted subordinate. Therefore, he did not show any fear when facing Xia Ho's eyes and said calmly, "The seal is from the Chang and military ministry. It doesn't prove anything." Gu Shi knew that the general did not want to hear that the assassination had anything to do with anyone in Chang'an. In fact, there was no evidence to prove this, so he answered with certainty. General Xiahou no longer looked at him, nor did he mention anything related to the Chang and military ministry. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked at the dawn. After a long silence, he squinted his eyes and said expressionlessly, "They found a psyche master who hated me for half of his life and a proud and incompetent young swordsman who thought he was a genius and could make great achievements to assassinate me. It seems that, the Yen kingdom does not want the crown prince to return. This time, the Yen kingdom sent a genius great sword master and a psyche master who had lived in seclusion for many years to carry out the assassination. It seemed that they had paid a great price and invested a great deal of effort and expectations. The situation at that time also seemed extremely dangerous. But in fact, compared with General Xiao's unparalleled strength, this assassination was more like a desperate suicide. Listening to this seemingly brainless analysis, Gu Shi admired in admiration and said, "The general is really clever. This year is the day when the crown prince of the Yen kingdom returns home. Whether the assassination is successful or not, his majesty will definitely be furious. If the general writes another letter, I'm afraid that the crown prince can only continue to live in Chang'an city as a duke." General Xiahou said expressionlessly, "How can I follow the wishes of those Yen kingdom people? Send an order to the army not to mention this assassination. Later, I will write a secret letter to His Majesty to explain the whole matter. It is not so easy to keep Prince Longqing, whom you Yen people have pinned the hope of restoring your country, in the country. Prince Longqing may not be willing to stay in the Yen kingdom." Gu Shi thought of the news from the military ministry the day before and said with a smile, "Being able to enter the second floor of the academy to study with the headmaster of the academy is not necessarily worse than being a substitute crown prince." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 133. There is a mistake in the previous article. Xia Ho is not the Defender General of the state, but the Defender General of the army. Report it to me first, and I will correct it immediately. Chapter 3 Before 6. The morning light turned from dim to bright. General Xia Ho walked to the eastern front line expressionlessly. Gu Shi and a team of personal guards followed him silently. The light of the rising sun shone on his armor, emitting a faint white luster. He looked like a mighty statue of God standing in the holy light. Xia Ho walked into the temporary middle military camp tent and listened to his subordinate report the result of the cavalry of the left vanguard breaking into the Yen territory in the morning. After a long silence, he raised his head and said, "Kill 300 Yen prisoners of war as punishment." At this time, there was no one else in the tent except him and Gu Shi. Gu Shi looked at him and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He advised, "General, you decided to hide the assassination and only sent a secret letter to His Majesty. If you kill prisoners of war in front of the battle, I am afraid it will be difficult to hide it. What's more, those Yen people will definitely take the initiative to publicize it." Xia Ho said indifferently, "The Yen army entered the country and harmed the old and weak people of our Tang Empire. They burned our villages. It is reasonable to kill 300 prisoners of war. I don't believe that anyone dares to say anything." Gu Shi was silent for a moment and said, "But it is not auspicious to kill prisoners of war. His Majesty will not like it." Xia Ho took off his helmet and put it aside. He quietly looked at this loyal subordinate who had accompanied him for more than 20 years and said, you should know very well that His Majesty has never liked me. The reason I'm still alive today is because I've made immortal contributions to the empire. Our Tang Empire has always been clear about rewards and punishments. As long as I can continue to make contributions and the officials in the court can't catch me, His Majesty will not easily hurt me. In this way, it doesn't matter whether His Majesty likes me or not. Besides, if His Majesty likes me too much, I really don't know what to do. This paragraph, especially the last sentence, contained some meaning that only the two of them could understand. After a moment of silence, Gu Shi was about to say something when a horizontal line embroidered with gold thread on his cuff suddenly lit up. "Go," Xia Ho said. Gu Shi bowed silently with his hands folded in front of his chest and then left the tent. There was no one in the tent. A self-mocking and slightly bitter smile appeared on Xia Ho's face. He said softly, "I am so lucky to have met such a benevolent king like your Majesty. Otherwise, I don't know how many times I would have died. A gentleman can be deceived with methods, but can I deceive your Majesty with benevolence?" It's just that the sovereign king cares about old times, cares about that layer of friendship that no one knows about, and has allowed me to live for these few more years. After a while, Gu Shi lifted the curtain and came back, holding a sealed letter in his hand. He walked to Xia Ho and said softly, "The military ministry sent a letter with a talisman. Recently, Chang'an City has not been peaceful. I heard that there was a murder case in southern city, which even alarmed the Yulin royal guards." Xia Ho sneered, "The officials in the imperial court took advantage of His Majesty's leniency and even dared to kill my subordinates. Haven't they learned to behave themselves in front of His Majesty after suffering such a big loss from Cao Shaoshu a few days ago? It really has nothing to do with the officials in the imperial court." Gu Shi shook his head and replied, "A master of see-through realm died in the murder case in southern city, and that person used to be a former officer of the military ministry. That's why these disturbances were caused." Xia Ho's eyes gradually condensed. He squinted at him and said, "Go on. I don't know if the general still remembers this person. His name is Yen Suqing. He used to be a document appraiser of the military ministry, but few people know that he was a great sword master." Speaking of this, Gu Shi took a deep look at the general and continued, "This person should have been enlightened and learned swordsmanship in the Haotian Divine Palace in West Hill. After being expelled from the military ministry because of that year's matter, he had been living peacefully with a tea merchant in Chang'an City. I didn't expect that he would die a violent death in the end." The atmosphere in the tent gradually became serious and cold, and the candlelight in the corner swayed uneasily. After a long time of silence, General Xia Ho asked indifferently, "In the 13th year of Tianqi era, how many has it been?" Gu Shi replied softly, "Censor Zhang Yiqi died in a car crash, former Xianwei general subordinate Chen Zixian died violently in Eastern City, and this Yen Suqing was beheaded. This is the third death this year." The people of the Tang Empire were simple and firm. Chang'an City had a large population. Although the public security was excellent, there might be one or two abnormal deaths every day. The third death mentioned by the two people in the tent at this time naturally did not refer to the number of abnormal deaths in the 13th year of Tianqi era, but the deaths related to those past events. If Her Majesty hadn't stopped the birthday banquet this year and allocated some spare money to the military ministry wouldn't have thought of looking for veterans to send condolences, and wouldn't have found that Chen Zixian, who had long been forgotten, had died suddenly. Gu Shi looked at Xia Ho and said softly, "Now Yen Suqing has also been beheaded, and the method is very similar. If we can confirm that the so-called accident of censor Zhang Yiqi is also a murder, then we can find the truth of the matter. Not everything has the truth." General Xia Ho said indifferently, "The people who should die in the two cases are all dead. Who will remember these things?" Gu Shi replied, "When fishermen cast their fishing nets, they always think that they can catch them all, but in fact, every time the fishing nets come out of the water, there are always a few fish that slip through the net. In my notes, there are at least 11 people alive in the Xianwei general's mansion. General Xiahou slowly closed his eyes and said, "Those who can survive are some short-term handymen, who can't be beheaded according to the law of the Tang Empire. But all the servants and maids who have a contract with them are all dead. I don't believe that those short-term handymen who have nothing to do with the main family dare to hate the imperial court and still want revenge after so many years of forbearance. We still have to check it." Gu Shi said worriedly, "At least as I said before, we should send someone to see if there is anything strange about the death of Censor Zhang Yiqi. I don't believe that there are still victims left in the two cases, but I am worried that the repeated killings are used by a noble in the palace to make trouble and establish power." Xiahou replied indifferently, "The princes are still young, and the fourth princess is just a silly girl. If His Majesty wanted to bypass the law to deal with me, he would have sent someone to directly cut off my head 10 years ago. There is no need to use these trivial means. But there is still a noble in the palace." Gu Shi glanced at his face and said cautiously. As expected, upon hearing these words, General Xiahou's expression suddenly turned cold. He coldly stared at him and said, 20 years ago, when you swore an oath to follow me, I warned you that as long as I was alive, as long as I had a breath left, you were not to mention that noble person in front of anyone. Have you forgotten?" Gu Shi bowed his head deeply and sincerely begged for forgiveness. But deep in his heart, there was a very tired and helpless sigh. He thought, "General, you don't want the world to know the relationship between you and that noble also doesn't want the world to know. It's just that you chose to stay away from Chang'an and keep silent. But who can be sure that the noble will not use some more extreme and cruel methods? As the saying goes, once one enters the palace, one's heart is as hard as iron." Xiahou looked at his subordinate who was begging for forgiveness in front of him. He thought of his loyalty over the years and the fact that he had been hard to ferry between the two banks of the turbulent river with him all these years. Xiahou's face became slightly relaxed and he said in a low voice, "But you are right. We must investigate the things in Chang'an City." Send a psyche practitioner back. After a short pause, he added expressionlessly, "Warn those who handle it. Even if they find out something, they are forbidden to act on their own. All the evidence should be submitted to the military ministry and the Chang'an local government. After all, the investigation is the imperial court's business." Gu Shi took the order and left. There was no one in the tent. Xiahou took off his heavy armor and then sat on the couch. He silently looked at the faint candlelight that was about to be swallowed by the skylight outside the tent, motionless like a statue. His face was a little pale. The previous thunderous roar directly killed 2 cultivation powerhouses. That scene was so powerful, but no one knew that his body was still a little injured. As a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts in the world, his combat power was unparalleled. As long as he moved his mind, the vigorous chi of heaven and earth would condense on the surface of his body and connect inside and outside. The psyche power could not hurt him, and the flying sword could not break him. In fact, if he wanted to kill the 2 cultivation assassins from the Yan kingdom, he could have chosen a simpler and harmless way to deal with them. But he was General Xiahou, who was known for being ruthless, cold-blooded, and domineering. There were too many powerful enemies in the world. He had to maintain his invincible image in front of his enemies and his subordinates, so he had to choose the most arrogant and powerful way to deal with them. For this reason, he even did not hesitate to hurt his body and mind. If he did not want to be annoyed by the endless assassinations, he had to show his thunderous means and forcibly suppress the fighting desire of most of the enemies. This was probably the helplessness of many peerless powerhouses. The curtain was lifted, and a manservant walked in with a bowl of carefully prepared bird's nest and golden date porridge. The manservant looked handsome, and the porcelain bowl on the plate was exquisite and beautiful. It was obviously not an ordinary thing. General Xiahou took the bowl of porridge indifferently and drank it in one gulp. He waved his hand to signal the manservant to leave. He knew that the officials in Chang and who were jealous of him had been secretly saying that General Xiahou liked handsome manservants and had a special interest in bed. He was indifferent to this kind of rumor and was not angry at all. Because both His Majesty and the places he was really afraid of were very clear about a fact, since he cooked his most beloved concubine to death, he had never been close to a woman again, nor would he use any maidservant to serve him. When he cooked that concubine to death, it was a time when the censor's attacks were like a tide and the general's position was shaky. Those who thought they knew the inside story thought that he used the excuse of peeping into military affairs to cook his most beloved concubine to frighten a chief eunuch who was ordered to go to the military camp for questioning. However, only Xiahou himself knew that the chief eunuch who came to ask questions had nothing to do with the censor's memorials. What he was afraid of had nothing to do with the censors who had no strength to truss a chicken. It was a summer day. The night was short and the day was long. The light emitted by Haotian was not only warm but also blazing. A strict letter of inquiry from the West Hill Divine Kingdom was directly sent to the Chang, an imperial palace. Even the unknown place expressed serious concern. In the vast Min Mountain not far from the military camp, countless sword lights could be vaguely seen. Xuan, you shouldn't have performed the devil's dance that day. Xiahou stared at the porridge that was gradually freezing between his fingers. He thought that if it was still in the past, the gentle woman he loved the most would have noticed it immediately. Then, she would have taken out a handkerchief to gently wipe it off for him. He could not help but shake his head and repeat expressionlessly, "You really shouldn't have performed that dance, although that dance and you when you were dancing, were really beautiful." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.